very happy morning and momentous occasions where we will have the 11th Arryman Symposium, where we will participate in a presentation of research project of our fellow Arrymans here in some of the Arrymans have already graduated from their PhD program. Some are in the pipeline, to become PhDs very soon. And we're very happy to welcome all of them. Some of them here attend in person. Some others will join online through Zoom. And we're very happy to welcome their research outcomes. And I would like to extend a warmest welcome to our esteemed guests, and also our host here at UI3. We have our rector, Professor Komarudin Hidayat, our vice rector, Pak Jamhari, Professor Jamhari Makruf, the Dean of Social Sciences, Dr. Philip Vermonte, Professor Jeffrey Allen Winters from Northwestern University, and ISRSF Board of Yayasan, and then Pak Agung Binantoro from the Doctoral Foundation. Welcome to UI, Pak Irfan, the chairman of ISRSF, and other esteemed guests. We have faculty members, Professor Kimuna here, our Arryman Scholars, Yos Kenawas, Luthfi Adam, Sofian Ansori, Rido. We're very happy to welcome everyone here at UI3. Good morning and welcome. The rundown of our event, we will have opening remarks from first Professor Komarudin Hidayat, our rector, and then followed by a few words by Pak Jamhari, and then the chairman of ISRSF, Pak Irfan Hutagalung. For the first welcoming remark, I'd like to welcome Pak Rektor, Professor Komarudin Hidayat. Applause for Pak Rektor.
Honorable guests and participants, very good morning. And first of all, I would like to address our special guest and friend, Pak Jeffrey Winter. Welcome again to our university. For me, you are a good friend that always give an additional energy to, well, intellectual engine for this university. You always insist that this university should have a prestigious and professional research center. And again, thank you very much for your commitment. Also, our friend from IFAR and our colleague from faculty. I stand before you today as director of IIIU. Well, filled with pride as I inaugurate this morning's event. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome each and every one of you to prestigious Arryman Symposium, hosted this year by the Institute of Advanced Research at IIIU. I know that maybe almost of you joining us through Zoom. The Institute of Advanced Research IFAR at IIIU is the result of fruitful collaboration between IIIU and the Arryman program at Northwestern University. Again, thank you very much, Jeffrey. We have brought in a graduate of the Arryman program to join our institution was as a researcher, furthering the exceptional research and teaching agenda at IIIU. And we believe and we know and we agree that, well, this campus is designed to be the research university. And we hope that we can produce and we can contribute some, well, say like advice to government, to organization, to any, well, social actor based on our research. Not our statement, but should be based on research, should be based on the objective research. Our aspiration is for this partnership to continue well into the future as IFAR at IPAU develops into an excellent research institution. Today we have the pleasure of showcasing a wide range of research outputs from both newly graduated and soon to be graduating Arryman Scholar. I hope that the presentation will inspire our students here at IPAU, while also providing an opportunity for these emerging scholars to receive valuable feedback on their research from our esteemed faculty members and scholars. As we embark on the symposium, let us remember that the pursuit of knowledge is a lifelong journey. When me as an alumni of pesantren, it is like an ideology of our life that searching knowledge. Knowledge is a lifelong journey. Minal mahdi ila lahdi. So whenever we meet kind of slogan that it is lifelong journey, for us it is already deep seated in our heart since we are in pesantren, because pursuit knowledge from the womb to the tomb is obligatory. It is wajib in Islam. As it is the continuous process of growth fueled by the curiosity and exploration. This symposium presents us with unique opportunity to foster intellectual connection, forge new collaboration, and lay the groundwork for future breakthrough. In conclusion, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for being a part of this Arryman Symposium. Your presence here signifies your unwavering commitment to the pursuit of knowledge and your dedication to academic excellence. And again, I would like to extend our gratitude to all our friends that so far they always give support and encouragement for us, to our staff, for me personally, to as a rector, how to make our dream come true to this university, that IIU will become intellectual hub, that we can connect our richness of Indonesian culture and intellectual to the global networking. Again, thank you very much for your support. Thank you, and I wish you all a truly enriching and enlightening symposium. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Professor Komarudin Hidayat. What an excellent welcoming remarks that energized this morning symposium. Yeah. And next we will have IFR at UEE Executive Director and also Vice Rector, Professor Damhari Makhluf. Time is yours, sir.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to everybody. Professor Komarudin Hidayat, Rector of the Indonesian Islamic University in Indonesia, Professor Jeffrey Winters from the Northern University, Pak Agung from Raja Wali Foundation, and our professor candidate, Pak Phil Monde, the Dean of Social Science here, because I'm sure that he is already professor quality, so I have not mentioned about that. So, and distinguished participants and ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to everyone. Welcome to IIU. As our rector, Professor Komarudin Hidayat, has mentioned earlier, it is our honor and privilege to welcome you and every one of you to the prestigious Arryman Symposium, hosted this year by IFAR at this university. Please allow me to say a few words about our IFAR at our university. The institute is mainly a social science research institution where our researchers work in their respective research project. However, in establishing IFR at Triple IU, we are not just creating a physical space, we are building a community, a vibrant and inclusive ecosystem that will foster collaboration, encourage interdisciplinary dialogue, and inspire groundbreaking research. This institution will serve as a platform for scholars, researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to come together, exchange ideas, and work toward a better understanding of the complex issues that affect our Indonesian society and beyond. I would like to express our gratitude to all of those who have contributed to the establishment of IFR at Triple IU. Many of you are here among the esteemed guests and audience. Our heartfelt appreciation goes to supporters, partners, and collaborators who have joined us in our quest to advance the frontiers of social sciences research in Indonesia and to bring positive impact to our society. Last week, actually, I talked to director of Monash University here, Professor Andrew McIntyre, and he's ready to work with IFAR at Monash University. And actually, he is jealous that why IFAR at the university hosting the symposium. This Arryman Symposium is our first event, a momentous one of, if I may, where we would like to kickstart our IFAR at our university research agenda. It is our hope that our institute will start and continue to produce important research that advance the scholarly horizon as well as support policy making in Indonesia. So thank you so much again for your participation in today's Arryman Symposium. Enjoy this symposium. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Professor Jamari. I think maybe next time will be other IFAR's chance to host the symposium. But we are very happy to have the first chance to host this year's symposium. Yeah, like Pak Jamari said, we're very happy. It's a privilege to welcome everyone here. Lastly, we will have ISRSF Chairman Irfan Dulu to give a few words as well.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone, especially from Indonesia, and good evening with you from United States. Some of our participants and speakers are coming from other part of the world and other time zones. Distinguished host, Pak Komar, Prof. Komar, terima kasih for welcoming us. Prof. Jamari, the IFAR Director and Vice Rector, Pak Dekan, Prof. Philip Vermonte, mudah-mudahan tidak terlalu lama lagi, soon will be a professor. Pak Agung, welcome for this symposium, and still our mentor, our guru, Pak Leader. Welcome you all to Arryman Symposium. We are very excited to be co-sponsoring the 11th annual Arryman Symposium 2023. Every year since 2015, the ISRSF has presented the Arryman Symposium together with Northwestern University. And starting this year, it is being hosted by the first time by one ISRSF university partner in the IFAR Consortium, that is the Institute for Advanced Research at Universitas Islam International Indonesia. All the presenters are Arryman Scholars. Some received their Ph.D. in 2020 or before, while others are finishing now in 2023. All these Arryman scholars did their doctoral studies in social sciences at Northwestern University in Chicago, United States. While the main goal of the Arryman Scholar initiative is to new generation of world-class academic based in Indonesia, who are committed to the highest quality research, publication, and teachings in social sciences and public policy. Therefore, the Arryman Symposium is, like Pak Jamari says and Pak Rector says, is a showcase not only of these emerging scholars, but in the future will also be an intellectual forum for the very best academic works being done across Indonesia. We believe that you will find the scholarship of this year presenters to be interesting and stimulating. Once again, thank you for coming. Thank you for participation in this event. And thank you again for UII that give us a forum, give us rooms and wonderful place to be the first Arryman Symposium held by the IFAR. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Pak Irfan. Pak Irfan is our chairman at the ISRSF. ISRSF providing support to all of us, the Arryman scholars, during our study, and we're very grateful for the unwavering support from the Yayasan. Yeah. Without further ado, we will commence with the symposium. Our first speaker is Rahardhika Utama. Rahardhika is a sociologist trained by the best sociologists, if I may, in the disciplines, and he just graduated with flying colors, if I'm not mistaken, right, Jeff? So we are very eager in awaiting Rahardhika's research result, and we're happy to have him here virtually through Zoom. And the symposium will be conducted this way. We will have the presenters having their presentation for 30 minutes, and then we will open for Q&A to the audience, including to the Zoom attendees as well. I think Rahardhika is ready to present. Good morning, Dika. How are you? I think I will give Dika the time, 30 minutes for presentation. I would like to invite an applause from the audience. Yeah, welcoming Dika.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gde, for a very kind introduction. Can everyone hear me all right in the other side? I hope so. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitations to present in this amazing event. Thank you, Universitas Islam International Indonesia. Thank you, IFAR, for coordinating and for organizing this. Thank you so much for having me. I will start my presentations by raising a question. Sorry, can you hear me on the other side?
I think there is a technical issues right there, Dika.
Pas jika ngomong akun di sini di mute aja ya, nggak malu. We have some technical difficulties as moment. Dika, would you like to try again, please?
Absolutely. Can you hear me now?
Fantastic. I think the Wi-Fi is back. Yeah. Thank you, Dika. Time is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Bang Gde, for a very kind introduction. So I will start from the beginning. I would like to thank you, Universitas Islam International Indonesia and IFAR for organizing this spectacular symposium. Thank you so much for having me. I will begin my presentations by raising a question. What explains diverging development in Southeast Asia? Why do some countries, such as Malaysia and Thailand, have higher level of economic development than Indonesia and Myanmar? Without paying our attention to the agrarian roots of development, our existing knowledge in explaining variations of economic development in Asia is distorted. Here is why. First, to understand the variations in economic development, we need to consider the variations in agricultural burdens. In Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, the colonial plantation system created the legacy of agricultural burdens. Agricultural burdens, which include factors that impede the movement of labor out of the agricultural sector and factors that hinder agricultural productivity, have cumulatively sustained an agricultural economic structure with diminishing returns from production activities. Countries with prominent agricultural economic structure is attributed to the large numbers of agricultural labor and vast cropland area, therefore requiring extra efforts and resources to mobilize labor out of the agricultural sector into more productive sectors, upgrade agricultural technology, and implement other agricultural modernization policies. It is not easy for this type of countries to be modernized to industrialized. Hence, countries with agricultural burdens encountered more challenges to rapid industrializations than those with smaller burdens and lower rates of economic development. Let's imagine a race where each runner represents a country trying to reach a high level of economic development as a finish line. They each carry a different scale of burdens. Some of them 50 kilograms, some of them 30 kilograms, 20 kilograms, and some of them has a very little burden. Some runners carry heavier burden than the others. So countries with heavier agricultural burden are more likely to experiencing delayed industrialization or even be exhausted before reaching the finish line, before reaching the high economic development level. These countries will need to spend more energy to reduce their agricultural burdens so that they can run faster to catch up than countries with the lighter burdens. And the following visualizations I would like to show includes data representing these diverging paths of development. These animated graphs shows changes in agricultural share in the economy on the x-axis, and GDP per capita on the y-axis. From 1970 to 2019, among Southeast and Southeast Asian economies, we will see the trend of how countries shrink their agricultural sector over time in their effort to become richer. I will start the animation. We see a contender here, Japan, rising very fast and the rest of Southeast and Southeast Asian countries are catching up very slowly. The trend informs us that most countries that achieve high economic prosperity in Asia generally are countries that did not have a substantial agricultural sector to begin with in the 1970s. However, most Asian countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, are agricultural economies, and to industrialize, they had to deal with issues associated with agricultural sector, such as having a large pool of unskilled agricultural labor, an extractive agricultural economy with low productivity, and large abandoned fields. Land tenure issues, as well as political problems associated with peasants' insurgencies following the end of the World War II. This pattern inspired me to develop a research agenda centering on the agriculture and variations of development in Southeast Asia. Existing scholarships on economic transformations that put greater emphasis on elite-state relations and cases of countries with small agricultural burden is not sufficient to study the variations of development among countries with significant agricultural burdens, like the countries I highlighted at the bottom here. Given the fact that many countries in the region were agricultural economies after the World War II, the earliest data I could gather for this purpose is 1970, we need to consider political and economic factors related to agriculture that enable or inhibit economic transformation processes. In other words, we need to consider what political, social, and economic factors that facilitate or impede a country to address their agricultural burdens. This research agenda led me to investigate further the second aspect of the agrarian roots of diverging development, which centers on the variations in state-peasants political relations. Let's zoom into the variations of development among the agrarian economies that we are all familiar with in Southeast Asia. Malaysia, shown by the brown arrow here, and the brown circle, and Indonesia in the blue arrow, blue circle, they had diverging paths of economic transformations. In the 1970s, the agricultural sectors of Malaysia and Indonesia were around 30 to 40% of their national economy. At that time, in the 1970s, their GDP per capita were both under $2,000 US. Let's moving forward to 2019. In 2019, the agricultural sectors of both economies shrank significantly to less than 15% of their GDP of their economies. And yet, Malaysia achieved a GDP per capita of around 11,000, while Indonesia's GDP per capita grew to only 4,000. The pattern of this diverging development in Asia, particularly between Indonesia and Malaysia, also goes beyond the GDP per capita, beyond economic development. The pattern are also found in the number of people working in agriculture. Extreme poverty and life expectancy are so different between the two countries. And education, this divergence in development is puzzling because the two neighboring countries actually share many commonalities before they launched their economic modernizations project in the 1970s. Both countries had similar potential for a thriving economy. First, Malaysia and Indonesia share the same geographical advantages of being located in the equatorial region, as well as at the intersections of global shipping routes. Second, continuing the political legacy of colonial rule, both countries installed central government bodies that tasked with coordinating national economy. Third, although ruled by two distinguished colonial governments, the two independent countries left with similar endowments of the colonial agricultural economy. As the largest global suppliers of natural rubber before World War II, the two neighboring countries were left with a sizable plantations industry and smallholding economy. Agricultural output in the two countries accounted for greater than 30% of the national economy before 1971, as I was showing earlier. Fourth, both countries had considerably easy access to pool of labor, given the history of labor participations in the colonial plantations economy in in 1910, 1920. And finally, the two countries both obtained a significant boost of state revenue, state income, and economic growth by benefiting from the two waves of oil boom in the 1970s. By 1990, both countries managed to shrink their agricultural economy to below 20% of GDP. Both countries also managed to grow their industrial sector to around 40% of GDP in 1990. However, Indonesia chose a path of industrializations that resulted in perpetual dominations of agricultural economy with low productivity, while continuously partaking in state organized violence in the rural areas against peasants, such as land dispositions, etc. Conversely, Malaysia successfully transformed its economy by featuring the agricultural sector as a core of industrialization strategy and rarely engaged in organized violence against its rural communities. So despite both countries substantially shrink its agricultural sector, why does Malaysia gain higher level of economic development than Indonesia? What drives this diverging transformation? To answer these questions, I propose to bring peasants back into the questions of diverging development by reconsidering the importance of the agricultural burden and state-peasant relations in understanding economic transformations. My thinking on this research agenda was largely shaped by my readings on comparative development, colonial origins of development, and state-centered theories. We might be aware of a strain of literatures on developmental state. So focusing on comparative development in Asia, actually, a group of scholars theorized the developmental state model of economic transformation. The premise of this theory is that the cause for remarkable economic transformations lies in the existence of an institution called the developmental state, which comprises organizational complexes in which expert and coherent bureaucratic agencies collaborate with organized private sectors to spur national economic transformations. This set of scholarship exclusively examining the developmental state that germinated or withered from the relations between state and elite actors, such as capitalist class, international forces, and party leaders. I believe an elite-focused analytical choice is not sufficient for explaining the trajectory of development among countries with historically large agricultural burden. A closer look into state-peasants nexus is needed to understand the politics of development and the role of geopolitical forces in peasants' mobilizations and demobilizations. We need to consider the underlying political process of development that includes a study of political relations between state and non-elite actors, such as peasants. The literature on developmental state also mostly stems from case studies of countries with less significant agricultural burden, such as South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong as an economy. However, most Asian countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, have been agricultural economies and had to deal with issues related to agricultural sectors, such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam, the Philippines. Therefore, without considering the central role of peasants in development, our understanding of the impediment and catalyst of economic transformations offered by the existing theory of development in Asia is incomplete. By focusing on the agrarian roots of development that highlights the state peasants' political and agrarian relations, I also contributes to debates on the organizations of power and capital, as well as the legacy of colonialisms in the Southeast Asian political economy, which I elaborated in other projects that I'm currently working on. For this research, I conducted a very exciting 18 months of fieldwork between 2016 and 2019. My fieldwork comprises archival studies, where I analyzed political debates, colonial records, Cold War strategic documents, and national development blueprints in around 20 archive centers worldwide. You can almost see here at the bottom right of picture how I'm edging out through my library cards, since I visited so many libraries and archive centers during that period of time. And I triangulate my archival data with oral history and historical ethnography. I conducted in-depth interviews with 170 agricultural producers, brokers, industry leaders, government officials, and development planners across Southeast Asia. And also multi-sided ethnography in 10 rubber communities in Indonesia and Malaysia. In each community, I conducted extensive observations that ranged from rubber producing and marketing activities to community meetings, recorded oral history from senior community members, and mapping the rubber community chains. The left photo here is Batopo, a pseudonym. He was my host and my primary informant when I did my fieldwork in North Sumatra. This is a map showing research sites in my multi-sided ethnography. Thanks to the generous support from the Arryman program at Northwestern and Southeast Asia Research Group Henry Luce pre-dissertations grant, I have the most rewarding fieldwork experiences as I am learning the social and historical life of rubber, including when I got bitten by a snake one time, had an oral history interview with a village ghost, and got detained by rubber mafia in a remote warehouse somewhere in the Asian rubber belt. I will not be able to disclose that in these presentations, but happy to talk more about it when we meet in person. Here are also short list of archives that I incorporated into my comparative historical analysis. And the reasons why I chose to compare the policies of development in Malaysia and Indonesia by tracing the rubber agricultural and industrial development in the two countries are the following. First, both Malaysia and Indonesia were historically two largest global supplier of rubber. Secondly, both in Indonesia and Malaysia, after the Great Depressions in the 1930s and the World War II, most of rubber in Indonesia and Malaysia comes from smallholding plantations, smallholding farmers. And this make the rubber peasants the backbone in the rubber industry in the regions since 1940s. Rubber, why I chose rubber? Rubber was a commodity that gave a boost for the rise of new peasantry class in both economies, who are the plantation labor and smallholder planters created by the colonial plantations economy. I can talk more about the new peasantry class later, but I would like to highlight that this new class of peasantry, they're experiencing a lot of several transitioning experiences from when the feudalistic system were replaced by the plantations colonial economy to later after the independence, when independent government decided to take over the ownership of land. And there has been an ongoing conflict since the end of the World War II between peasants communities and the state, the government, the military. And despite sharing similar attributes and engaging in transitory experiences, such as participating in various agrarian conflicts throughout the economic history of Asian rubber belt, the peasantry class in post-colonial Malaysia succeeded in gaining a foothold in the sphere of development politics, while their counterparts in Indonesia remain excluded. And last reason, I chose to study rubber because rubber has historical, political, and industrial properties illustrating the economic transformations from agriculture to an industrial economy in Malaysia and Indonesia. We can see here on the left picture, the queen tapped rubber in Malaya, and rubber is harvested by tapping, making a scar in bark of the rubber tree. And then latex is the liquid that's come out of that bark and being collected in the past, and some in Malaysia and olive oil in Indonesia. That latex is stored as liquid and processed in a simple factory to be coagulated and being made into the seeds, like being presented here by the two sweet people in the picture. And then after that, that rubber seeds, smoke seeds, they are being sent to the manufacturers to create tires, mattresses, even some components of satellites. Our lives have changed dramatically because of the technology of how rubber is being processed. And rubber is one of the backbones of modernity, if I can say, of the in our century. But in Indonesia, it's very rare for us now to find this type of processed rubber, because farmers, they prefer to just make a rubber lump, which is a very low quality, and export it at raw materials with a very low price. More story on that later. But I will take a pause here about rubber. I would like to come back to my argument, to my research. This chart summarizes my arguments and guides how I organize my findings in these presentations. I would like to highlight two of my important contributions in the way I conducting my research, and hopefully to better inform of future research, is that I would like to highlight that there is a colonial legacy that is rarely discussed across literature called agricultural burdens, where because of the colonial plantations economy, the post-colonial states, post-colonial societies, they tend to engage in a very low productive type of economy, which is in the plantations type of activities. And it's accumulating. And while the progress of the global economy going on, this type of post-colonial countries, they remain to be the producers of the agricultural products. And so that's what I call agricultural burdens. Those are factors that inhibit, that impede the transfer of labor out of agriculture, and factors that inhibit the enhancement of agricultural productivity. The second thing is the embedded peasantry, which I would like to talk about later. But these two factors, these two components, are key in my research, and I would like to highlight that. So peasantry embeddedness is types of political relations stemmed from either harmonious or inharmonious relations between state and peasants. When it is a harmonious relations, it is the embedded peasantry, which usually resulted in how the state fostered agricultural development, and peasants are being included in politics of development. While when the political relations between state and peasants was conflicting or inharmonious, the type of relations that come forward is these embedded peasantries. And in this type of political relations, peasants tend to be excluded in politics of development. And the peasants were either repressed by the state elites or by military elites, and most of their economy were captured for the elite interest. And that's where I argue this is where Malaysia and Indonesia diverge in the agrarian relations between state and peasants. While Malaysia is taking the path of embedded peasantry, Indonesia took the path of this embedded peasantry and resulted in such different paths of development. So let's go into some highlights from this research on the data that I find. In Malaya, I would like to bring us back to the era of 1940s, right after the end of the World War II. So the resurgence of communism in Malaya started with the ethnically divided society within the colonial economy. The region of Malaya, which is now the peninsular Malaysia, the region was the primary producers of tin and rubber that sustained the British Empire, with ethnic Chinese occupied the tin mining sector, and the majority of Malays, as well as smaller populations of Tamils and Javanese, work at the rubber plantations. The Great Depressions in the 1930s hit the tin economy very hard, followed by World War II that affected the Chinese community severely. When the British resumed its power in Malaya in 1945 after the World War II, the Malayan Communist Party, MCP, mobilized Chinese tin mining workers in a sequence of labor unrest. They presented a strong anti-British agenda, which was responded by a series of harsh demobilizations efforts by the British colonial government. Since then, the MCP, which previously adopted political diplomacy and union work, turned towards violent armed revolts using guerrilla strategy. The shift in the Communist Party's agenda launched the Malayan Emergency, or the Anti-British National Liberations War, fought predominantly by ethnic Chinese communist supporters against the colonial police force between 1948 and 1960. The British colonial government deployed a sizable military force in the guerrilla war until 1950 and spent a lot of money for that before it shifted into what it's called the BRICS plan. So the BRICS plan is a squatter resettlement plan, entails the creations of new villages where ethnic Chinese squatters resettled into surveilled zones and fed with anti-communist propaganda. The goal of this plan is to cutting off effectively the contacts of the bandits, the guerrilla fighters, with their sources of supply. Through this plan, the British successfully gained cooperations from the Chinese squatters to defuse the communist insurrections in exchange for better living and conditions in secure resettlement areas. Although we need to acknowledge that the living conditions in the new villages are far from ideal. Interestingly, during the implementations of this resettlement project, the BRICS plan, the colonial government also deployed funds aimed to restore the rubber economy by distributing replanting schemes or funding for both estate big corporations and smallholders through a series of rubber industry replanting ordinance issued since the 1952, targeted to Malay and Indian smallholders. The policy promoted the revitalizations of rubber plantations on the outskirts of the Malaysian jungles where guerrilla fighter warfare took place. Many Malay smallholders applied to these replanting schemes, and the majority of applicants granted financial support from the government to revive rubber plots, which were destroyed either during the Japanese occupations or destroyed during the guerrilla war. The agricultural program contributed significantly to limiting the operating zone of the communist guerrilla movement, along with the resettlement project under the BRICS plan. Since the majority of Malaysia's agricultural development between 1952 and 59 profoundly focused on reviving the rubber sector, peasant emancipations become a cornerstone for further agricultural policies and politics of development in Malaysia. After Malaysia gained independence, the political influence of peasants in Malaysia increased significantly due to their involvement in the state-organized peasants' emancipations of the 1950s, the replanting schemes that I presented earlier. Starting in 1959, the politicizations of Malay villagers began spreading through the increased exposure to politicizing informations initiated by UMNO, United Malays National Organizations, a political party in Malaya that played a significant role in the country's politics since the country gained independence and predominantly represented the interest of ethnic Malay communities during that time. And UMNO's emphasis on the Malay community's interest has made it a natural home for many peasants voters who saw the party as their champion against the British colonial government interest. Because of the peasants' emancipations in the 1950s in Malaya and active involvement in political movements through UMNO in 1960s, Malaysian peasants managed to influence the state's approach toward agricultural development that prioritizes their interest in post-independent Malaysia. The 1950 peasants' emancipations eventually evolved into two key government organizations that empower peasants. We have FELCRA, Federal Land Consolidations and Rehabilitations Authority, that carried on the land distributions to small farmers. And the second institution is RISDA, Rubber Smallholders Development Authority. RISDA and the schemes preceding the formations of these institutions provided rubber peasants with intense smallholding advisory services that pair them with advisors trained by the Rubber Research Institute. Interesting fact, these advisors were trained in Indonesia. before 1960s. The schemes also provided rubber producers with cash subsidy, high-quality clones, and free tools, as well as fertilizers, subsidy to cultivate high-quality natural rubber. As integral part of the initiative, the government fosters rubber processing centers where smallholding producers sold and processed their raw materials in a cooperative organization since 1960s. Bottom line, Malaysia did a very good job in developing the network of agricultural productions, particularly rubber, from the grassroots, from the network in villages, and up to the upstream where rubber is processed. And the government helped market rubber globally as well. There is a very interesting relief displayed in front of the wall of Bangunan Getah Asli. It is a skyscraper. If any of us visited Petronas Tower in Kuala Lumpur, across that Petronas Tower, there is a big, old, tall skyscraper. That's the Bangunan Getah Asli. And you can see this relief on its front wall. And it depicts the story of how rubber built up Malaysian economy and modernized Malaysian society. It said here, I translated it roughly, rubber industry grows prosperously in Malaysia due to science and technology. So the rubber industry in Malaysia was coordinated under the Malaysian Rubber Board. This rubber board coordinated everything from raising high quality rubber trees to facilitating the partnership with industries to enable manufacturers to get the highest quality of rubber latex from the farmers. And they're doing a lot of different kind of things. But the state's approach to contain communist insurgency formed and sustained the embedded peasantry in Malaysia during the peasants' emancipations in 1950s. The state actively engaged with peasants in the development process, and peasants were participating politically in the development process, and this continued shaping the harmonious state-peasants political relations in the subsequent periods. This persistence of embedded peasantry, I argue, is also fostered by the enduring structure of agricultural networks built since the 1950s. Interestingly, Malaysia also chose to reinvest revenue from the oil boom in the 1970s to strengthen the rubber plantations and manufacturing industry. Malaysia expanded downstream productions of rubber-related manufacturing goods driven by innovations and strong linkages between government, rubber producers, and firms. And let's look at Indonesia, our familiar home. In Indonesia, the Communist Party, PKI, gains its influence in Indonesian politics by gaining significant voters in 2 rounds of elections in the 1950s. During this period, they focused their energy on community outreach to rural areas and successfully attract supports from peasant communities and plantations workers. Many peasants communities, particularly those who are directly affected by land tenure issues surrounding the nationalizations process of colonial assets, found political allies in PKI who advocated for a land reform agenda. They joined Communist Party mobilizations to dismantle feudalistic local governments in the country. And their joint advocacy for land reform culminated in the issuance of the 1960 Basic Agrarian Law, OUPA, which formally replaced the colonial land tenure and regulated nationwide land reform agenda under the Sukarno regime. Supported by the anti-communist Western allies, we all know the story, by the United States, Britain, and Australia, a wing of Indonesia's army forces launched a mass political massacre that killed more than 500,000 civilians because of their direct alliance with the Communist Party. A new anti-communist political regime under President Suharto took over Indonesian state in 1967, and he continued to disband and repress peasant movements. The peasant massacre set into motion chains of subsequent events, culminating in dissenting states' approach toward agricultural development after 1967. There are 2 aspects of the peasant massacres that play an important role in the configurations of this embedded peasantry. in Indonesia. The first is the military forces' involvement in the massacre, leading to the militarizations of agricultural development. The involvement of military led to the penetrations of military influence in agricultural development that further perpetuating the discordant relations between the state and peasants throughout the development processes in the 1970s and 1980s. We all remember that there is a famous program called ABRI Masuk Desa, where Suharto sent military personnel to the villages to oversee the social life of people, particularly those who are working in the agricultural sector. There is this quote from Suharto's speech in February 1969, say that military forces will be deployed to support the success of development in the agricultural sector. So he was very strong from the beginning that military forces should be part of the agricultural development process. In my fieldwork, I came across a very interesting monument, a statue in the middle of nowhere inside of a large plantations area in North Sumatra. It's called the Sujono Monument. That is designed mimicking the monument we found in Jakarta. So inside the state-owned rubber plantations located next to the Sutopas village, the persons in the picture, the New Order government built a gigantic monument to commemorate the May 1965 massacre. Massacre of the Sujono, which used to be a police officer that was accused to be killed by the peasants. So the statue portrays the heroisms of Sujono, the military officers, and all of the military officers that successfully annihilated the communist force through the bloody massacre for the sake of development. As a part of the memorial structure, a relief crafted on a wall depicting the wickedness of organized peasants and the consequences they suffered for being communist supporters. There is a plaque underneath this monument called, underneath this monument, Underneath this monument, the red blood of Peltu Sujono spilled on earth and he died as the hero of development, May 14, 1965. This is a gigantic memorial monument, and it's quite very big and very prominent. One of the witnessed of the massacre during the 1965-1966 said to me in an interview that hundreds of peasants' bodies buried underneath this monument. One day, a 48-year-old farmer who owns small rubber plot confirmed with me when I helped him tapping his old rubber tree why people are still scared to be associated with the dark history or sejarah hitam in the area. He mentions that almost every year in October, he was mandated by local authorities to attend the commemorations of the sacredness of Pancasila Day, Hari Kesaktian Pancasila, in the Sujono Monument, where police officers, military personnel, students, and government officials enacted a ceremony to honor the death of Sujono, the hero of development, in the hand of the communist peasants. In the formal ceremony, military police and government representations often give aggressive speeches condemning peasants' wickedness and warn farmers to stay away from communist propaganda, or they will suffer in the hand of state like their predecessors. Years after the massacre, Indonesian political atmosphere, still deploying the communist propaganda to control or to influence the mass. 3 other farmers I interviewed also attended this ceremony in the past, and they heard the same forceful advice specifically addressed to farmers to not engage in any collective activities because it will remind the local authorities of the peasants' organizations, peasants' movement in the past. Before the killing, not many people are aware that Indonesian rubber smallholders, rubber farmers, they were produced most of the global natural rubber supply and coordinated through a smallholding associations with 20 million memberships and supported by an internationally renowned rubber research institute. The association is called Persatuan Perkebunan Getah Rakyat Indonesia, or Indonesian Smallholding Rubber Associations of Indonesia. This is a corporation of smallholding rubber farmers that controlled the majority of raw rubber supply in Indonesia until 1966, until the massacre took place. The corporation was connected to the rubber trading centers in London and Brussels in Belgium, and coordinated the commodity flows from the rubber peasant communities in Sumatra and West Borneo before 1966. While it had the backing of the Sukarno regime, the association was disbanded by the New Order Indonesian government in 1970. In the aftermath of this, the existing networks of rubber producers crumbled into ruin as many surviving smallholder coordinators ran away or abandoned their rubber plots out of fear of the political massacre and imprisonments. Besides, the government took over the association's properties and utilized the remnants of the organizations to gather intelligence information for the anti-communist campaign. And with the shattering rubber producing network, Indonesia lost its capacity to coordinate rubber commodity as a potential source of revenue, like Malaysia did. The last picture on the right was the National Office of the Indonesian Rubber Institutes, which have been struggling with funding source for years because now they were excluded from the government funding system. So this is the relief displayed on that gigantic monument I showed before. This portrayal of peasant massacre is not uncommon. Across North Sumatra alone, I found at least 5 monuments with similar messages, that peasant mobilizations was a communist traditions, and those will be crushed by the authorities. And the government continues to deploy anti-communist discourse, which we will hear a lot during the elections, for example. So the disembedded peasantry, the disharmonious relations, dissent relationship between peasants and state resulted from this anti-communist massacre has constrained a previously strong coordinating network of agricultural resource. And Indonesia lost its opportunity to revive the cash crop agricultural economy amidst the ongoing tensions between the state and peasants in the 1960s. We all are aware about this. While Malaysia reinvested this excess revenue for advancing their manufacturing industry, I'm talking about the revenue from the oil boom, Indonesia's revenue from oil was consumed through massive infrastructure projects as well as corruptions. Besides, the priority of industrializations back then, between 1960 and 1990, was building a heavy industrial sectors, such as natural gas, cement, steel, coal, and fertilizer industries. Nothing dripped down to modernize the agricultural sector. To conclude these presentations, I would like to highlight that the variations in anti-communist agenda, preconditions by transnational process, forge a divergent path of agrarian political relations in the 2 neighboring countries. We have embedded peasantry in Malaysia and disembedded peasantry in Indonesia. Embedded peasantry has a locked-in effect on the path dependency of economic development in these 2 Southeast Asian countries that historically carried a largely agricultural economy. I also conclude by inviting scholars of political economy and development to consider agricultural burdens and peasantry embeddedness as agrarian roots for diverging development in Southeast Asia and beyond. Thank you so much for listening to my talk. I welcome any feedback, any questions. I'm excited to continue on this research and also expand, collaborate in the future. Hopefully, if any of the audience are interested in pursuing this area of research. But thank you so much. Thank you for hearing.
Thank you, Dika. What a great presentation from Dika. Yeah, I think it's not an overstatement when we say that Dika's research is theoretically solid, methodologically robust, and a lot of abundance data. What an Arryman research project should aspire to, yeah. And we are very proud of you, Dika. Right now, we will have Q&A. From the audience and also from the Zoom participants, we will have 10 minutes of Q&A. Yeah? Anyone would like to engage Dika in the Q&A, please raise your hand and I'll give the time for you. Oh, we have Professor Jamhari, Dr. Vermonte. Okay, we'll have Pak Jamhari first, yeah.
Thank you, Dika, for very excellent research and also excellent presentation. And I think we are very happy and very proud of you. One thing that I would like to ask your suggestion, if you like to, make a reformation in Indonesia for the agricultural development, what do you suggest? That's only. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the question. So if I would love to, Pak Gde, shall I address the questions right away or shall I?
I think you can answer first, Dika. It's all right, yeah. And then we'll have the other question for that.
Yeah, I am fortunate enough to be trained with scholars at Northwestern to pursue the traditions of problem-solving social science. And in one of our workshops, we really come together and distilled how can I translate this research into contributing into solving real-life problems. And one of our findings from that workshop, based on my research, is that Indonesia needed to reconsider the smallholders' agricultural development. So really reviving the smallholders economy, the cash crops one, not only focusing on rice or beans, but we have amazing opportunities to resurrect the cash crops besides sawit, for example, like rubber. Strengthening research is definitely one important thing that I will suggest. Right now, a lot of research centers around cash crop was not funded by the government, but funded by corporations, and of course, capturing the corporate interest. But many smallholders, they left to a very rudimentary technology without any support, without any subsidy. So I would like to advocate for this rubber, not only rubber, but smallholding development projects to be revived that really designed to build up these smallholding communities, not having the big corporations in mind, like the nucleus estate projects, for example, in the 1980s, 1990s. But the one, maybe there we can learn from Malaysia a little bit, because Malaysia used to learn from Indonesia before 1966 happened. Maybe it's time for us to focus on creating links between agricultural producers, the smallholders, with the manufacturing industries that we are having. So that will be my short answer, but of course I will have an extensive answer as well. If we meet in person, Pak Jamhari, I would like to explain more about this. Thank you for the question.
Dr. Vermonte, time is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Dika. That was a very fantastic research and dissertation that you've been writing. A quick question. You spend a lot of time explaining Malaysia, but probably it's because time limit. On the Indonesian part, it seems to be very short story. Now, if you could, tell us more about what happened in Indonesia, aside from this military disembedding peasants in Indonesia. Would you think there are other factors that cause this sector to be declining in Indonesia over the past, 4 decades, 5 decades? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Pak Philip, for the questions. And of course, the explanations that I offer is not the only one. My primary goal is to highlight what's missing for our explanations of why Indonesia experienced such a delayed economic transformations. There are different kind of scholars pursuing arguments about the organizations of capital, for example, how the capital building from the independence era or after the Suharto era was being captured by the elite. Professor Winter's Oligarchy book, for example, gave us a lot of insights of why there is no trickle down effects on really building the economy from the ground. But what I'm offering is that we have a missing opportunity that when Indonesia receive a windfall from the of income of revenue from the oil boom, instead of reinvesting that into the agricultural development projects that benefits peasants and building the industrializations based on our comparative advantage. Indonesia at that time chose to invest it on the heavy industries, capital intensive, that was not necessarily engaging the producers at the local level, because it is, of course, it is easier for the cronies, for the corruptions to take place when the capital was reinvested into something that has nothing to do with the mass supports like the agricultural, because investment in agriculture was challenging enough because you were dealing with a lot of people, a lot of labor, a vast area of land. But one key interesting finding I found in Indonesia is there was a very interesting ideological or preferences of the Indonesian New Order government to avoid making any developmental projects, interventions that can resurrect the peasant movements across Sumatra. Most of our focus, usually we are talking in our scholarship focusing on Java with rice and paddy. We have Swasembada Pangan, for example, focusing on the farmers in Java producing food. But what about the rest of the farmers in Sumatra, in Borneo, that has been engaged in this cash crops production since the colonial era, perhaps? They were undermined, and not a lot of programs were designed to them. When the Suharto government decided to bring something to them in 1980s with the World Bank support of the nucleus estate projects, it was not for the benefits of the farmers, but for the benefits of the elites to control the network of agriculture, to make it easy for land dispositions and etc. So that will be my alternative explanations of why we need to reconsider the politics of agrarian development in understanding Indonesia's trajectory of economic and political development. Thank you.
Thank you, Tita. I think we have John Pink here raising his hand. We're very happy to.
Hi, thank you very much. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if this is working. Yeah, excellent. I have two questions, really. Very interesting comparison of Malaysia and Indonesia in the rural sector. The first is, you don't really talk about class differentiation within the peasantry. And of course, this is a major topic of discussion, analysis in both countries. Of course, the peasantry is not a unified class. There are big farmers, small farmers, and there are, particularly in Indonesia, a large, and in Malaysia, in fact, a large class of rural people who are not landowners, who are wage workers, and that class has been growing over time in both countries, and you're not talking about those people. So I'd like to know what your view is of class differentiation in the countryside and how that affects the politics. The second question is about migration, which is that, you know, the Malaysian, what you call the peasantry, which I think is a problematic term, but the Malaysian peasantry can only really survive through migration and wage labor in the industrial sector and in the agricultural sector, right? So small farming is only viable as an economic prospect in Malaysia if small farmers can migrate and work for wages in the off season, etc. So to what extent is this class, which of peasants, already integrated into into industrial development and into plantation agriculture, both in Malaysia and in Indonesia? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pak Pinkas. Some of the answers were actually present in one chapter in my dissertations that is informed by your book on the class differentiations of farmers in Indonesia. So I thank you for that. But answering your question, what was very interesting to me was that I kept looking back in the history of the creations of this new class of peasantry, and how does that new class emerge, and whether there is a difference between, across ethnics, whether it's migrants, farmers, or whether it's a Malays farmers, Tamil farmers in the context of Malaysia, of course. But back in the time when this critical juncture took place of how the state started to move into the directions of embedded peasantry or disembedded peasantry, whether they engage politically or engage in development or not. In my argument, it is decided by that particular period of time. In Malaysia, it is in the 1950s where the peasants' emancipations took place, and at that time, the peasantry movement, the peasantry class of labor, are the new class of these peasantries that were funded by the British Malayan government. Most of them Malays, some of them Tamils, that was funded to revive the rubber sectors. And since then, they maintained that legacy, that traditions of political engagement and economic engagement in the national economy. And if we move forward to modern Malaysia, of course, there are more, the class differentiations were more apparent because there are new people coming in from Indonesia, for example, from Thailand working in Malaysia. But I do agree with you that I do need to consider further how does that class differentiations among peasantries matters in today's Malaysia or Indonesia in understanding their engagement in political development and also in economic development in terms of industrializations. But all of your points are taken, and I would like to incorporate that further when I do revise and publish this research. Thank you, Pak Pinkas.
Thank you, Dika. I think because of time limitation, we will only have one more question from one of our students here. Sonia, I think time is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Dika. This is an amazing research. My question actually the continuation of Prof. Phillips and also on the class, social class. So what I understand is that a strong peasant will likely generate a strong government intervention. And Barrington Moore, for example, explain how different classes generate different regime. So my question, how the embedded peasant and also this embedded peasant, how their behavior towards market mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the questions. You were on point on the Barrington Moore side that this research is also inspired a lot by Barrington Moore's project and book. But in terms of market engagement, we need to first understand as well that when this new class of peasantries appear before the World War II, during the colonial period, they are pretty much engaged with the market in the sense that it is organized by the colonial plantations economy, the colonial market, that their engagement is really limited to...
Ini Mas Ari lagi presentasi nang UIII, Universitas Islam Indonesia.
I think someone has... It's okay. I'm going to continue answering the questions. So the market engagement at the beginning, when the embedded and disembedded peasantries appears, were mostly informed by the colonial plantations economy. However, as I presented earlier, when the small holding sectors, the smallholders, they surpass the contributions of the organized colonial estates, the peasants' engagement to the market becoming more accentuated, becoming more present. However, that short-lived engagement, for example, like the associations of smallholding Indonesian farmers that I presented as well, that even has a market engagement in the global stage, having an office in Brussels, in London, and everything, they are all gone when the government decided to deploy the sentiments toward the peasants and disbanded these organizations. So that's why I think, to answer your questions, the reasons why I did not really talk a lot about the market's engagement at the period where this embedded and embedded peasantries emerged was because the state power during that time, the post-independence Indonesia and Malaysia, was so strong that they can undermine the market forces. Indonesian farmers will not have been able to engage in market economy if all of that networks, all of that channels were closed. One interesting finding that I had was about how during the 1966, 1965, 66, how in Pelabuhan, in Belawan, in Medan, all of the rubbers that was ready for exports to overseas, they were now seized by the military forces, and farmers could no longer sell their rubber because they were involved in the headhunting by as victims of the headhunting. Like some military forces. This is coming from an interview that one witness said that they're using actually tracing the rubber farmers using the chains of the rubber markets in a way, like if they are aware there is this supply of rubber being sent to Belawan in Medan, they can trace it back to whose farmers producing this. What are these farmers organized and having affiliated with the communist wing or not? But no matter what happened, all of this is just showing how prominent was the state and military control in the case of Indonesia in limiting the interactions between farmers and markets. But I'm not saying that there is no market forces at all operating during that period, but it's just limited by the state power. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dika. Excellent response. I would like to invite applause for Dika. Yeah, great first presentation to kickstart our symposium. Next, after Dika, we will have Norman Joshua, yet another rising star in the Arryman program. Yeah, Norman is currently in Stanford, combing Gay Parker's archive. Yeah, and is about to defend his dissertation on militarization in Indonesia in 1950s pretty soon. Yeah, Norman, time is yours, sir. Do you have no? All right then.
Hello, it's Gde. How are you? Can you guys hear me? Well,
yes, perfect. We got you perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm now going to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, fantastic.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. Good. Good evening from Evanston, and good morning for our fellows and friends in Depok. And Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. I want to thank you for all of you being here, and I want to thank Universitas Islam International Indonesia and the conference committee for arranging this exciting conference. It is an excitement and honor to be able to talk in this year's Arryman Symposium. And my name is Norman Joshua, and I'm a PhD student in the Department of History. And today I will present an overview or snippets, if you will, from my current dissertation project. After a long period of war and revolution, Indonesia received its transfer of sovereignty from the Dutch in December 1949. However, almost 1 year afterwards, on November 20th, 1950, a representative for the Ministry of Interior, S. Purwodiharjo, wrote a letter to the Minister of Defense, Sultan Hamengkubuwono IX. In the letter, the Ministry of Interior requested Colt revolvers, carbines, and klewangs, or short swords, to be used by members of the civil service or the Pamong Praja. These small arms were to be distributed to the provincial governors or gubernur, residents, residen, regents or bupati, mayors, wali kota, until the district chiefs or wadana, and even the under district chiefs or the camat. In addition, the weapons were also destined for the civil service police corps, or what we know now as Polisi Pamong Praja and its supporting staff. In total, the Ministry of Interior requested 3,440 pieces of Colt revolvers, 7,010 pieces of carbines, and 9,000 pieces of klewangs. In replying to the request, the Hamengkubuwono agreed to lend the small arms, provided that the armed civil service members were to be properly trained and protected by local army or police units. Without this protection, according to Hamengkubuwono, they will become easy targets for the wild forces roaming Java in search for small arms. This distribution of small arms for the civil service was the first in Indonesian history. From this episode, it is clear that the security situation in Java during the 1950s was so dire, forcing the Ministry of Interior to provide civil service with small arms. While the revolution officially ended in 1949, the country was brought into a period of liberal democracy. Experts have lauded that liberal democracy was an optimistic period of political experimentation, where the country and the nation experimented with parliamentary democracy, political parties, freedom of the press, and its first national election in 1955. There was much progress and cultural development too, as the country's intelligentsia tried to formulate a new national culture for Indonesia. Revolutionary violence, however, tended to spill over, and the transition from a revolutionary to a post-revolutionary state was often marked by violence. In this case, Indonesia was no exception. In 1950, Indonesia remains in a period of continuous conflict that was multidimensional in scope, while the state that they inherited was weakened by war and revolution. In general, the national infrastructure were heavily damaged, the bureaucracy was riddled with problems, and the national economy was severely dislocated. In Jakarta, where the presence of the nation-state was felt most, the state institutions were muddled by political competition between political parties, which often spilled over to other state institutions such as the civil service, the army, and the judiciary. In short, the Indonesian nation emerged from the revolution intact, yet the same thing cannot be said about the state itself as an institution. The question is, how do we understand 1950s Indonesia? And I argue that during much of the 1950s, urban and rural Java was beset by violent crimes and armed groups, which provide a setting for the army's conceptualization of military role in non-military affairs. These groups, dubbed the Grombolan, became a chilling specter that haunts elites and commoners alike. Indeed, the prevalence of violent crimes was the main contributor to the general feeling of insecurity. These Grombolans may show many reasons behind them. Think about the Islamist Darul Islam in Java, the anti-demobilization groups of Andi Aziz and Kahar Muzaffar in South Sulawesi, and brigands such as the Bambu Runcing and the Citarum Grombolan in West Java. In general, however, these violent crimes were caused by the proliferation of small arms, the prevalence of competing armed groups over limited resources, and the limited institutional capacity of the state. It was in this context of insecurity that the army began to conceptualize its intervention in non-military affairs. What is the Grombolan? The word itself refers to a group of people, yet with an ambivalent connotation. This tradition of ambivalence projected through semantic means is actually a direct continuity of the revolution. At that time, the bulk of the Republican fighting force during the revolution was what we often call of the Pemuda or Angkatan Muda. After Proklamasi of August 17, 1945, these young men and women organized themselves into armed groups, which is often called Laskars. This Arab Persian word literally means an armed unit outside of the military and often politically oriented. These Laskars came in a variety of forms, from a politically-oriented organized group with a basic setup of administration to a melange of armed bandits that showed only patrimonial, group, or regional loyalties, participating in sustained or symbolic revolutionary actions against the Dutch. Major examples of these Laskars were the Pemuda Sosialis Indonesia, the Hizbullah, Barisan Banteng, Barisan Pemberontakan Republik Indonesia, and the Laskar Rakyat Jakarta Raya. These groups were so important to the revolution that the state tried twice and failed in both incidents to incorporate and regulate these armed groups. During the first effort, the Minister of Information Amir Syarifuddin tried to organize a first Indonesian Youth Congress to consolidate all of these Laskars into a single coordinating body. The initiative failed. It only managed to amalgamate 7 youth groups into the Pemuda Sosialis Indonesia, which then became one of the largest youth groups during the revolution. And second was the promulgation of a martial law regulation, which defines how the state regulate and approve these Laskars. However, both of these efforts failed, and after the end of the revolution in 1949, many of these armed groups remained across Java, retained their weapons, and became rebels or criminal. These former Laskars were often confused, disoriented, and out of the job. Many of them only knew fighting, which hardly allows for useful skills in the post-revolutionary world. In order to survive, many of them became criminals or brigands. Hence, these former Laskars became problematic, and the new term "gerombolan" became in vogue. The ambivalent nature of the word itself is representative of the state's attitude against these armed groups. Consider the statement of Mas Yumi chairman Kasman Singodimejo in 1955 in regards to the Darul Islam Gerombolan. The government should not consider the Darul Islam an enemy, rather like a father its son. Regardless of how naughty the son, if taught a lesson, he should not be beaten to death, or rather given a lecture or dealt with just one blow, yet still drenched in affection. It is similar with a domestic rebellious movement. Thus, the Gerombolans were a social problem that had to be rectified, although not necessarily through violent and military means. We spoke about the concept of the Gerombolan. How was the extent of it? One report from the Dinas Reserse Kriminal, or the Criminal Investigative Service, now Bareskrim, for 1951 is quite illustrative here. From January to October 1951, there were at least 38,232 incidents of violent crimes, ranging from arson, armed robbery, kidnapping, and homicide. The perpetrators were differentiated into 3 major groups, namely political Gerombolans, such as the Darul Islam and Bambu Runcing. Second was the common robber Gerombolans, and third was the potentially foreign influence Gerombolans, such as Angkatan Perang Ratu Adil. And fourth, and this is I think the most important one, is the former soldiers or freedom fighters Gerombolan, which include the Adi Aziz and Kahar Muzakkar group. These categorizations often does not translate well in the field. For instance, the mutiny of Battalion 4223 and 426 of the Diponegoro Division was a mix of these demobilizational and Darul Islam factor. Yet it is clear that the state paid much attention towards the Gerombolan problem, as these Gerombolans often robbed and murdered members of the army, police, village guards, civil servants, and commoners, while they were also heavily armed, mobile, and oftentimes more capable than government forces on the ground. These major crimes were reported and compiled by the Criminal Investigative Service and the State Security Surveillance Service as security disturbances or important reports. Often, these crimes were recorded as such due to the involvement of small arms and other dangerous weapons. For instance, common thefts conducted by individuals or gerombolans were also recorded in this database. While this data is certainly far from exhaustive, but it serves as a prominent example of how insecurity caused by violent crimes were actually prevalent across Java during the 1950s, which I would say that it was in an age of gerombolan. It was during 1950-1951 that the newly consolidated Unitary Republic of Indonesia started to focus on re-establishing peace and order. Sukarno, the president, first spoke of the gerombolan problem in a speech during the 1950 Armed Forces Day on October 5th, 1950. He said that armed groups, which may have at first been formed to confront the Dutch, have deviated from their original objectives and are now being used by those who are willing to seek political goals in a way that was against the law, or have become gangs or gerombolan and mobs whose purpose is none other to pound or menggedor. Menggedor actually means it's actually a house invasion, and to steal, loot, and rob people. These groups must be disarmed or destroyed by military action if necessary. Thus, security became a priority for the cabinets. First initiated during the Natsir cabinet on October 11, 1950, and it was ramped up during the Sukiman cabinet in 1951. While re-establishing peace and order had been on the table since the Hatta cabinet, it was during the Sukiman cabinet that the Indonesian state started to aggressively engage with issues of insecurity. In fact, security became the #1 objective on the cabinet's list of programs. It's during this period that the state initiated a series of direct and indirect policies that were shaped by emergency powers and counter-insurgency. At first, the crux of the problem was seen in the wide proliferation of firearms. Consider the statement of one Mount Sarifin, a local of Perumpung, East Java, in regard to firearms in the early 1950s. It used to be free. People were offered to own one. My friend offered me myself. He worked there in a weapons factory or in the military. My brother also gave me one and told me that the bullets were in the backpack if necessary. In the past, everyone had guns. My parents also have them because the guns were small. If we need bullets, we will just ask the corporal living across the street. He usually gives us one box. He often gives me bullets during Eid. Use this instead of firecrackers, he said. But be careful not to hit anyone with it. So everyone had guns. Moreover, the thieves also have guns. Certainly, this illustration is very different to what we know today about Eid celebration or even criminality in Jakarta. Sarifin's location is also telling here, as it shows that the problem of firearms proliferation was not only limited to the hills and valleys of Java's hinterlands, but also in dense urban centers such as Jakarta. Thus, disarmament campaigns became a priority for the state. There were sporadic efforts to initiate this campaign as the Diponegoro Division and Central Javan Police opened a firearm registration office in Semarang in early 1950. On November 14, 1950, Prime Minister Natsir and Defense Minister Hamengkubuwono IX initiated a nationwide program for requisitioning firearms through a maklumat pemerintah or a governmental proclamation. The maklumat calls for every institutions, laskars, and individuals to surrender their unregistered weapons to the government from November to December 1950. The specter of unregistered firearms circulating around the country was quite tense. November 19, 1950, Jakarta was actually locked down for 6 hours due to report about the movement of illegal arms from the city to the countryside, which led to mass razzias across the city. Same month, a similar quarantine order was issued by military authorities over Bandung. In January 1951, Joint Army and police forces initiated counter-gerombolan operations in Yogyakarta and its outskirts, resulting in the arrests of 260 individuals and confiscation of 20 revolvers, 4 rifles, 4 automatic pistols, 2 Sten machine guns, 1,900 rounds of ammunition, and 51 explosives. There were initial successes to this policy. In Surabaya, more than 1,300 men surrendered their guns on February 1st, 1951. The military also moved to regulate laskars that often wore uniforms similar to the army, such as the initiative of Diponegoro Division Commander Colonel Gatot Subroto on March 8, 1951. This initiative was expanded in July 1951 by banning anyone outside of the military to carry, use, or own any military gear, from firearms to uniforms or insignias. These policies, however, ultimately failed. By early 1951, it only resulted in at least 4,000 small arms being surrendered. However, firearms raids continued to be conducted, as in Central Java, from 1950 until 1957. However, the problem of gerombolan remained. It became apparent for the military and many other civilian leaders that the gerombolan problem is related to the problem of demobilization. Many of these wartime Laskars and soldiers should be accommodated to post-war life in order to prevent them from joining gerombolans or becoming armed criminals. In an article published in the Pikiran Rakyat Daily on November 29, 1950, Nasution, who was back then still a colonel, argued that insecurity is the direct result of economic breakdown. Thus, there was a growing concern from the state to conceptualize demobilizational schemes. On July 19, 1950, the Hatta cabinet established a National Bureau for Demobilization, which oversees two major demobilization initiatives. The first was the National Reserve Corps, or the Korps Cadangan Nasional, and the second one was the Bureau for National Reconstruction, or the Biro Rekonstruksi Nasional. Both were established on December 1st, 1950, and the purpose of these programs were to train demobilized soldiers and Laskars to participate in the new task for national development. This civilian initiative was well received by the army. In October 1951, Colonel Gusti Pangeran Haryo Jatikusumo wrote that soldiers are not only on the front line of defense, but also on the front lines for development of the country. Meanwhile, Major General TB Simatupang was Army Chief of Staff back then, proposed to educate the former members of our armed forces, make them pioneers in the efforts to reform our economy. We can make them vanguards in opening up new lands, to become sailors, to become fishermen, to become modern farmers, and to become technical experts that are dearly needed for the development of our country. It is a mistake to consider that this project was an initiative that purely emanated from the military. In fact, civilians also supported this initiative. Consider Muhammad Hatta's speech in front of the Third Association for Military Officers, or the Ikatan Perwira Republik Indonesia Congress in Surabaya 1954. Perhaps one can think how older members of the army, for example, soldiers who, according to the current system, are no longer obliged to serve in the army and are required to return to society, they should be deployed to factories. If the army can contribute productive activities, build various kinds of companies, then the army can increase production and reduce the military expenses borne by the state. In short, with the activities of the army in building, organizing, and running development companies, the army contributes directly to our development. Thus, as early as 1950-1951, military role in non-military affairs was already conceptualized by the TNI in the context of accommodating these former soldiers and Laskars into civilian life. There were also initiatives by particular divisions, most importantly, the Siliwangi Division in West Java, who were actively operating against the Darul Islam Gerombolan. They established the construction battalions which for civic action in response to the Darul Islam Gerombolan. In 1952, military role in non-military affairs included military involvement in national development programs and demobilization under the CTN BRN programs. The initial design was for the CTN BRN initiative to demobilize 15,000 to 25,000 personnel per year for 3 to 5 years. Many of these demobilized soldiers were designated to be transmigrated to outside of Java to improve national agrarian output. In 1953, the CTN and BRN programs successfully relocated 26,585 soldiers and families to Lampung and South Sumatra. However, the CTN BRN program ultimately failed due to lack of funds, as its program was absorbed to the new Ministry of Freedom Fighters, which will become the Ministry of Veterans Affairs on April 9, 1957. During the same time that the state were working on demobilization, the army also experimented in counterinsurgency operations. Several large-scale operations, such as the Diponegoro Division's Operasi Merdeka in 1951, were launched against the Merapi Merbabu complex gerombolans in central Java. These initial counterinsurgency operations were done through deep cooperation between the army, police, and the government, particularly those from the Interior, Social, and Information Ministries, leading to a concept of triangular operation. In June 1951, Saidiman Suryadi Projo conceptualized the role of military liaison officers for civil military relations, which became the origins of the territorial officers and the territorial NCOs of the 1960s, arguing that there should be good coordination between political and military actions, especially at the battalion level. Meanwhile, a new development launched in 1958. There was a rebellion by the establishment of various councils in the regions, where tensions between central and regional governments led to the establishment of these federal councils. These councils were led by local army panglimas that were against Nasution. These include the Banteng Council in West Central Sumatra under Colonel Hamad Hussein, the Elephant Council under Maludin Simbolon in Northern Sumatra, and the Garuda Council under Lieutenant Colonel Berlian in South Sumatra. In Sulawesi, there was the Perjuangan Semesta or the Permesta Group under Lieutenant Colonel Vence Sumual and Lasale Lahade. These regional rebellions will be known as the PRRI Permesta Rebellion. All of these councils took over power in their respective areas through declaring a state of war under 1939 law on the state of war and siege. In 1957, Sukarno responded. Sukarno and Nasution declared a nationwide state of war in response to these regional unrests. Meanwhile, the government also accelerated the work of a committee for a new law on state of emergency, resulting a new draft law, the RUU Keadaan Bahaya, on June 18, 1957. The law was passed in the parliament as UU nomor 74 tahun 1957 tentang keadaan bahaya. While the law was often criticized by lawmakers as too similar to the old 1939 law on the state of war and siege, it actually played a role in delegitimizing the state of war declarations in the regions, while also paving the way for military operations. And it actually worked well for Sukarno and the army. It was during these operations against the PRRI Permesta that the military proved themselves as capable for conducting modern military operations, thus boosting their national prestige. More importantly, however, the new law actually formalized the frameworks for martial law governments, which were, as we all know, crucial for the establishment of guided democracy. So the presentation has shown that the first factor enabling widespread insecurity in the 1950s was the small arms problem. This fact is reflected in the prevalence of armed crimes and gerombolan actions. During this period, criminals often wielded Mauser handguns, revolvers, Stanham Thompson submachine guns, or Brand light machine guns. These weapons, which was often military-grade firearms, were widespread in Java after the revolution. It is most likely that these firearms were remains from the revolution or obtained from Dutch and TNI armories located across the country. In responding to the question whether Indonesia will be able to restore order after its return to Yogyakarta, a young Indonesian nationalist said to life journalist Max Weiss in 1949, he said that it will be very difficult, more difficult now than before the police action, the Dutch invasion of Indonesia. The Dutch are right when they say that at the heart of the problem is the fact that Japanese arms have fallen to the hands of many elements who have no interest in order and little real interest in independence. Some of these are communist, probably more will be communist. Most cannot be described in political terms. They are boys with rifles. Indeed, during the 1950s, firearms were not only a monopoly of the state, but it was often held by common people. It was in the context of this age of gerombolan that the army conceptualized its intervention in non-military affairs. After 1959, the rise of guided democracy, this pattern was exponentially expanded. On July 5th, 1959, Sukarno declared his famous Decret Presiden, calling for the disbandment of the Constituante and return to the 1945 Constitution. United democracy signified the end to parliamentary democracy as party politics became transmogrified into mass politics. During guided democracy, many of these institutional pathways to militarization grew exponentially. In consolidating domestic political support, Sukarno immediately initiated military campaigns against the Dutch in West Irian, or what we call as Tri Komando Rakyat, or the Three Commands of the People. The state then created a volunteers movement, or a Gerakan Sukarelawan, which consisted of the recruitment of people into volunteer groups that were trained in military techniques by the army. Most of the people recruited to the volunteers were civil servants and university students. As volunteers recruitment were ramped up by the guided democracy regime, particularly after the opening of hostilities during the confrontation against Malaysia, the Sukarelawan became a national symbol as it was depicted in cultural products, such as banknotes shown here. And this Sukarelawan moment actually became the apex of militarization in Indonesia. Finally, as the country was continuously ruled by martial law, military logic also pervaded the state. Many of the institutions of state become subjected to martial law administration bodies, such as the Supreme War Authority, or the Penguasa Perang Tertinggi, which later becomes the Supreme Operations Command, or the Komando Operasi Tertinggi, which served as a shadow cabinet during guided democracy. Military representation in the cabinet gradually expanded, with 1/3 of the Kabinet Kerja Pertama at the start of guided democracy to almost half of Kabinet Kerja Pertama at the end of guided democracy. Civilian ministers, such as Deputy Prime Minister Charul Saleh, Johannes Lemena, and Dr. Subandrio here, adopted military ranks and wore military uniforms. This is certainly a pattern that was established by none other than Sukarno himself, who often wore military-style uniforms. This created institutional pathways that conditioned the state of society for upcoming military rule in 1965. As the short presentation has shown us, many of these pathways were established far before the military authoritarian regime in 1965. The establishment of the Army's dual function or Dwifungsi doctrine in 1966, or even Nasution's conceptualization of the Army Middle Way or Jalan Tengah doctrine in 1963. The most important developments actually lies in the 1950s. When a coup d'etat occurs, the first objective of the conspirators is to legitimize their actions. In the words of Barbara Tuchman, to put on the garment of legitimacy is the first aim of every coup. Coups, however, are more akin to movies, where the majority of the important work was done behind the scenes. As Edward Luthbach pointed out in 1968, the crucial element for every coup was the dangerous and elaborate process by which the armed forces and the other means of coercion are neutralized and the political forces were temporarily forced into passivity. Therefore, when studying coup d'etat, the most intriguing aspect lies not in the actual event itself, but rather in these protected and intricate historical processes. Thus, when the new order arrived in 1965, the Indonesian state and society has already been thoroughly militarized. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Norman. It's a very interesting contribution to the literature of Indonesian historiography in the 1950s. Yeah, I think Norman is one of the new scholars working on that. Because of time limitation, we will have Q&A. Here in the auditorium, we have Pak Aan, Dr. Suryana. Yes, please, Pak Aan.
Okay, thank you, Norman. Interesting presentations. I just would like to ask several questions. One question is, if you look at table that you presented, most of violence occurred in 1952. So why were most of violence occurred in 1952? Yeah, that was my first question. And then what contributed to this violence? It seems it is very interesting most of violence occurred in 1952, and then at the same time there was a coup, right, military coup in front of presidential palace. I think that Kemal Idris led that kind of coup in front of presidential palace. Was it correlated with the most of violence occurred in 1952, and then was army involved, or was it unfinished restructuring in army that contributed into this rampant violence? Thank you.
Thank you, Pak An. Norman, just a quick note, make sure that your mic is all right, yeah, so we can hear you correctly.
Okay. Can you hear me? It's okay with the mic?
Yes, yes. I think it's great.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Professor. So I think this also relates to your observation on the October 17, 1952 affair, where there was this contestation between army reformers and those who were against the army reforms that led to discord within the army itself. So I think during this period of chaos within the army itself, there was like a temporary retreat by the security forces, which again then led to these the rise in these gerombolans. But then the October 17, 1952 affair itself is very complicated because yes, the army played a role, but then these were an internal competition between these army reformists such as Nasution Simatupang and those who were against these reforms from the regions that were really afraid to be demobilized. And I think this is also a big part of the story of these what Ruth McVeigh would say, that this is the factionalization of the army in the 1950s, which also explains why the army didn't really took over power before 1965. So yeah, I think that's actually a contributes to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. We will invite more questions from the audience and perhaps from the Zoom virtual participant. I'd like to be selfish and ask my question to Norman, yeah, because I'm very curious about your field work and also writing process, yeah, Norman. Could you talk a little bit more about your archival work experience? That would be very helpful to our students here at UI3. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So my sources, my archive sources are actually from Indonesian and Dutch archives. Yeah. So in Indonesia, I did work in the ANRI, of course, the National Archives, but I also did work in the military archives, which is not only in the armed forces and army centers for history, which is located in Jakarta and Bandung, respectively. But I also went to a couple of regional Kodam archives. So in the case of Diponegoro Kodam, or the Diponegoro division, it's in Semarang. It's based in a museum. That they just put all of these archives in a library in the museum, and they forgotten about it. So it's really a treasure trove of archival sources that many students can work on, and I think the same thing also is in the Brawijaya division in Surabaya and Malang. So I think a lot of these, what I would say that new emerging sources that can be used to analyze the military, and especially in a country such as Indonesia, where the military has never been out of the political equation, and I assume never been and never will, is that it's very important to look back into the 50s and the early period of these formation of the organization itself. Yeah, that's very much the story of the Indonesian part. But in the Netherlands, a lot of these reports on the 50s and the revolutionary period, and of course the colonial period, is in the Dutch National Archives in Den Haag, and it's I think doing archival work in the Netherlands was very, very convenient because you can take pictures and all that. So compared to in ANRI in Indonesia, you cannot actually take pictures. So yeah, I think it's very, very convenient.
How about the one that you are currently working on in Stanford? What archives are you looking at?
Yeah, so I'm actually already back from Stanford. So I'm in Evanston right now. But yeah, last summer I did work at the Hoover Institution, which is inside the Stanford University campus. And so the Hoover Institution compiles a lot of archival collections from the Cold War. So in regards to Indonesia, there is the collection of Guy Poker, who was an Indonesianist back in the 50s and 60s, who worked for RAND Corporation, which is a think tank that was close to the United States Department of Defense and the CIA. So there's these. I think there is a lot that can be done with Guy Poker's archives, but from my observation, it is very, very sanitized, very, very cleared by the CIA, DOD, and FBI, and all that. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Norman. I'm really sorry because of the time limitation. Maybe we have one more question, or maybe two, from Luthfi and yes, Miss. No, okay, and then from Luthfi then.
Thank you, Norman. Congratulations for finishing the dissertation. I think we had several, I think maybe a lot of discussion about your dissertation topic. I think I remember we discussed about the idea of militarization from a more cultural approach. So I would like to hear about that. What do you think? What did happen in the 50s in terms of militarization from cultural point of view? For example, I think we talked about that militarization is also a way for the state to organize the society using military, but not merely, organizing the society. Not only about army, right, about the military, but also the emergence of paramilitary groups, or the celebratory of military as hero of the nation, and so on and so on. So I would like to hear about that, because now I think we have also when we're talking about militarization, we also can talk about the paramilitary, and there's many important history to be investigated about paramilitary in Indonesia. For example, Pemuda Pancasila. So I would like to hear more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Luthfi. Norman, time is yours.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kang Luthfi. Yeah, I think it's yeah, Kang Luthfi is one of my mentors back in the my senior in the history department at the Northwestern back. And yes, I think I agree. We did had a lot of conversation about conceptualizing and theorizing what the militarization actually means. And yeah, certainly there are like there are indications that these I would say it's traditions of militarism that really remains in Indonesia. That in a sense is a heritage of the revolution and war, and then 1950s and definitely the 1960s. So a lot of these, for instance, like the Pemuda Pancasila and all these vigilante groups, they actually claim their heritage to the in fighting communism in 1965. But the patterns of these people, I mean these groups recruiting former criminals and gangsters, for instance, these are very, very similar to the Laskars during the revolutionary period. And the difference in the 60s was that the army already managed to organize this in through techniques and methods that they actually learned through the 50s for demobilizing the Laskar. So it's I think there are close links to these, and yeah, that's what I could say about the paramilitaries and the traditions of paramilitarism. I think another cultural aspect that I indicated, but perhaps I will explore more in the next project, is that these, as you can see, the traditions of wearing uniforms and all that. As I've shown that there was this acceleration or exponential growth of militaristic logic in Indonesian state and society back then, where was uniforms were viewed as a a prestigious way of showing power and showing influence. And again, this was also a tradition of the revolution. There was the martial dandy, I would say. But then I had to take point from Rudy Mrazek's book. But this continued until post-colonial period, and this was not purely the domain of the military, because Sukarno himself also continuously wore uniforms, and he actually said that this wearing this uniform is to show pride and that Indonesia is now independent and so on and so forth. So it's embedded there, but yeah, I think there's a lot to be said. And even actually in these symbols, such as like the banknotes that I pointed out back then, these sukarelawan as a national ideal, it's also something that then it should be explored more. So yeah, thank you, Kang Luthfi, for the question.
Thank you, Norman. Because of the time limitation, we really have to continue to the next speaker, and I'd like to invite applause for Norman. Thank you so much. Before we invite our next speaker, I'd like to extend our warmest welcome to Professor Agustinus Prastiantoko, Director of Unika Atmajaya, who virtually present through Zoom today. I'd like to invite an applause. Please, and also the director of IFAR at Atmajaya, Dr. Indri, who also present virtually today. Thank you so much for coming. And our next speaker, yet another rising star in our Arryman program, my colleague Yos Kenawas. Indonesian political scientists are in general awaiting Yos' dissertation. Yeah, he has a great data set coming. Working with the best minds in our department, including Professor Winters, Ed Gibson, and Rachel Riddle. And maybe Yos will share a little bit, a sneak peek of his work today. Yeah, welcoming Yos Kenawas. Please welcome.
Capek deh. Hasilnya kan amat ya, walaupun itunya oke.
Cek. Ya nggak kedengeran deh.
Makanya bawa aja laptopnya ke sana, atau kamu diambil dari kamu. Kamu kan bisa nanya kalau Luthfi.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And thank you, UI3 for the opportunity on hosting this event. Thank you, Prof. Komar and Pak Jamhari, and also the soon-to-be professor, Dr. Philip Sudarmonte. And it's been an honor for me to present some part of my dissertation today. This is the last parts, some parts of my last chapter of my dissertation, where I reflect back on the meaning of democracy, and I try to answer why dynastic politics matters. Yeah. Okay. Clear enough? Yeah. Okay. Now the things. Okay. So I would like to begin this presentation by asking you all the following questions. What if families, instead of parties, play a bigger role as contestants in elections? What if families can exercise functions that traditionally belong to political parties? What if families can actually can organize as effectively as any other political organizations? And how will it affect our understanding of democracy, and how should we understand today's Indonesian political landscape? So when I work on my dissertation on the variations of political dynasties in Indonesia, these questions keep bugging me, and they somewhat change how I perceive democracy. I wasn't able to reconcile the theoretical understandings of democracy and the empirical facts that I found on the field. That is, in many places, families play more important roles than modern political organizations. The fact is, family does not really have a place in the theoretical debates on modern democracy. When we discuss about family or we read about the democratization literature, it's silent and no one takes family seriously. When we talk about actors in democracy, we talk about political parties, civic associations, interest groups, social movement groups, and even organizations like the military, violent paramilitary groups, strongmen, and others. If you look at the theoretical debates on democracy and democratization, you can easily find discussions about the roles of those groups, but rarely find the debate on the role of families in democracy. Usually the debates recognize the role of individuals, then those individuals channels their voices through modern organizations like political parties or labor union or social movement organizations, and those modern organizations compete to win the power and make policies on behalf of their constituents or whomever their investor are. Therefore, when it comes to discussing the presence of families in democracy, the modernization perspective usually offers two general tones. First, modernization theorists view the inheritance of power from politicians to their family members in democracy as a normal occupational following, similar to other vocations, such as doctors, lawyers, teachers. It is natural if sons and daughters of politicians want to be a politician someday and win the office. After all, they have been socialized into politics throughout their life, and they have the skills, the tacit knowledge, political capital to follow their parents' footsteps. Those who study dynastic politics in the Western countries usually view dynastic politics in this light. Others view the transfer of power from dynasty founders to relatives as corrupt, full of nepotism, unethical, and detrimental to democracy. For some, dynastic politics is a remnant of the past that continues to survive in a modern political system that is commonly found in post-colonial countries. Dynastic politics is their political culture. These are general tones, the general tone when people are discussing the presence of dynastic politics in developing democracies, including Indonesia. To be honest, I don't buy both interpretation and of the presence of dynastic politics in democracy. In my dissertation, I would like to open an alternative option for us to discuss the presence of dynastic politics of family in a more analytical and hopefully productive way. In my dissertation, I view political dynasty as a type of political organization. I found that they are as capable as other modern political organizations in coordinating, organizing, executing activities to achieve the family's political objectives. Although they need political parties as their vehicles because the law says so, the actual political and organizing work is actually done by the members of the families. I also find that families that can build their organizational capacities primarily by setting up strong internal family institutions are likely to win elections, and some even have the capability to dominate the political landscape in their regions for nearly 2 decades and no sign of weakening. The only difference between family and other types of organization is its membership criteria. That is, members of the organization must share familial ties, be it through blood or marriage. And all the problems from this differentiating feature are, come from this differentiating feature. Other than that, the activities and how they operate are similar to any other modern organizations. When we see political dynasty as an organization, we can understand them as more than just occupational following or a remnant of the ancient political past in a modern political system. We will see dynastic politics as a political survival mode that can exist in any political setting, both in most authoritarian and most liberal democracies. We will appreciate the fact that engaging in dynastic politics is a rational choice for many politicians, especially when they have limited available means to ensure their survival. My research in Indonesia and corroborated by other findings in other countries, such as Thailand and the Philippines, suggests that politicians engage in dynastic politics when they perceive potential threats that are very likely to occur when they are no longer in power. What kind of threats? Many kind of threats, from legal action, continuity of family income, unfinished project or legacy, to simple and mundane reasons such as losing one's prestige. The bigger the perceived threat, the more likely politicians are going to engage in dynastic politics. They choose family members over non-family members with a simple assumption that family members are less likely to betray them. An assumption that is repeatedly violated by politicians' family members, as I have seen throughout my research. In Indonesia, excuse me, the high cost of doing politics alone already provides a fertile ground for politicians to engage in dynastic politics. High-cost politicians lead to the need to repay investments plus interest plus family income. And as you already know, many, if not most politicians, rely on siphoning the state budget through various ways, including illegal ones. Oh, thank you. This amazing, right? Yeah. It's like getting the from your kiai, yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Getting the blessing from your kiai, yeah. This condition already created a push factor for politicians to engage in dynastic politics. They need to protect themselves from potential legal repercussions, defend their family's source of income or wealth, maintain the continuities of their policies or legacies, if any. Of course, this is an oversimplification of the complex story of why politicians engage in dynastic politics. I'd be happy to discuss this further during the Q&A session, but long story short, dynastic politicians are some of the most insecure, powerful people you can find out there. Back to Indonesia. That is why when many incumbents have reached their second term in office, they seek to build their political dynasties. My research found that in just one election cycle, the number of dynastic politicians who occupy executive offices at the subnational level has grown threefold, more than threefold actually. If you look at the graph, in each election cycle, the number of dynastic politicians who successfully occupy political office grew at minimum 2x, or twice. This number did not include the failed cases where politicians tried to build their political dynasties but failed. The timing of the spikes highly correlated with the end of the second term for many politicians when the elections were held. I did not include the 2020 elections data in the slide, but my rough estimates suggest that there were about 164 dynastic politicians who competed in the 2020 elections, and about 72 of them won the election. What I'm trying to say is the trend of dynasty formation is increasing over time, and I would argue that this increasing trend shows that politicians see opportunity and values in engaging in dynastic politics. I expect that this number will continue to grow in the coming years, as there are no barriers for politicians' family members to enter the race after the Constitutional Court canceled the anti-dynasty clause back in 2015. This leads me back to my initial questions. What if families can participate as contestants in elections? What if families can exercise functions that traditionally belong to political parties? What if families can actually organize like any other political organizations? What will be the impact on our understanding of democracy, and how should we understand today's Indonesia's political landscape? I think right now it is safe to say that Indonesia is increasingly showing the characteristic of familial or dynastic democracy. Dynastic democracy itself as a concept was first coined by Yoshinori Nishizaki, who studied the presence of political dynasties in Thai politics. Despite my critiques to his concept, I think it is still useful to understand today's situation in Indonesia. Dynastic democracy, according to Nishizaki, is basically a subtype of democracy where the ruling elites are drawn from political families. I think the similar situation is also applicable to understand Indonesian politics. In today's Indonesia, political power is now distributed to many political entities, oligarchs, Islamic groups, military, paramilitary, and now families. This is true, especially if we see Indonesia's politics from below, from the subnational level, where hundreds of family members of incumbents or former office holders are competing for political offices in provinces, districts, or municipalities across the archipelago. Their presence surely puts some informal barriers to non-dynastic politicians who want to compete in elections. Therefore, in executive elections at the subnational level, we are seeing a decreasing trend of the number of contesting candidates an increasing trend of dynastic politicians' participation. Even at the national level, in political parties, in the parliament, we are seeing the emergence of powerful families who are now undergoing a transition from the first to the second generation, and for some even to third generation. Similarly, in many civic organizations, we are also seeing members of influential families occupying strategic position in the organizational structure. And one day, I believe they will use that as one of the platforms to launch their political career. And again, I have to reiterate that this increasing trend is not merely occupational followings or remnants of the traditional past or another form of patrimonialism. It is a result of politician rational and strategic calculation in responding to the institutions and, more importantly, to the threats that they and their families face if they lose their power. At this stage, I'm still refining the concept of familial democracy or dynastic democracy, but I think these are some features of familial democracy. I'm aware that creating a new subtype of democracy comes with a great risk of conceptual stretching, which potentially could create another democracy with adjectives. But who cares? I will take that risk because the situation that I found on the ground does not fit the existing conceptual variations of democracy. And be grateful if you could pose questions or give suggestions on how to refine this concept. Nevertheless, by proposing Indonesia as a familial democracy, I hope I can join great scholars before me who have debated the nature of Indonesia's politics for decades, from the era of Kahin, Wertheim, and Geertz, to Jackson with his bureaucratic polity, McVeigh with her Biemtenstaat, Faith with neo-patrimonialism, and Pak Phillips Al-Mukarram King, Dwight King, who proposed the concept of bureaucratic authoritarianism, to the more recent debates that involve my Kiai, Professor Winters, who see contemporary Indonesians as an untamed ruling oligarchy, and Eve Warburton, who portrays Jokowi's regime as a neo-developmentalist regime, and other scholars who have tried to understand the nature of Indonesian politics after Reformasi. I wish someday familial democracy can enter the debate and be used to interpret Indonesian politics. Finally, I hope that by approaching the presence of dynastic politics in Indonesia through an organizational perspective, I can move the ball forward beyond the debate of whether or not dynastic politics is ethical or unethical, to discussing what factors or under what conditions political dynasty as a form of political organization may need to align its interests to the broader interests of Indonesian people and the state. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'll be happy to receive your questions and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. Very exciting presentation, and I believe in the audience we will have a lot of questions coming for yours. Yeah. Anyone, please raise your hand, or maybe from the Zoom virtual attendees. Pak An, we have Pak An, Dr. Suyana.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, very interesting presentations. I would like to ask, probably this is not a very, how do you say? I mean, like, this is part of your dissertations, right?
Yeah.
And then this is one of chapters in your dissertations.
The last chapter.
The last chapters. Yeah. Probably can you explain us the data set that you use, method that you did in doing your dissertations? What kind of case studies? I mean, like, we have got dynasty in Indonesia, right? Megawati, Joko Widodo is building his dynasty,
yeah.
And also Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. And then you mentioned a little about the number of dynasty in Indonesia triple in regional areas of Indonesia. So can you explain a little bit more about probably you did field work etc. Okay, yeah, thank you.
So thank you, Pak An, for the question. So yeah, in my dissertation, I built an original data set on Indonesia's political dynasties by tracking all candidates, not those who won the elections, but also those who lost the elections, the Pilkada from 2005 to 2020. So it takes years to took me years to build that data set because I trace the name one by one, the familial connections, and the most difficult part is because we unlike Thailand or Philippines, we don't have accessible family registry that we can easily access to trace the family background, and also we don't share not all Indonesian families share a family name or have common family names. So I have to trace one by one of those who are running, contacting my interlocutors in the regions. And in some part, I went to visit the sites in Banten, in of course Banten, right? Because that is the most dynastic place in Indonesia today, and South Sulawesi, Southeast Sulawesi, East Java, and also in Kepulauan Riau. And yeah, based on that, I built. So basically, initially I wanted to track both those who are in the parliament and also at the executive level, but now I can only focus on the executive level because it's very dense and the number is also already very high. I'm hoping that within, I think this year, after I defend my dissertation, I will publish the data set so it can be accessible for other researcher to investigate, because dynasty is very interesting. For example, if you want to investigate whether or not having political dynasties have some effects on a local development, you can do that, or the other way around, like maybe in areas that are less developed, we are likely to see political dynasty. But so far, based on my analysis, there's no correlations between areas with complex economy or industrial economy with the presence of political dynasties, because dynastic politics, they can exist everywhere in Indonesia, be it in poor areas like eastern part of Indonesia, or in developed areas or industrial areas like big cities. Okay, Medan is one of the examples. And also if you go to Banten, there's some areas in the northern part of Banten, Cilegon, Serang, Tangerang, which we can, Tangerang Selatan, which we can consider as a urban and have industrial sector. The industrial sector is quite strong, but they still have dynasty, and they also have dynasty in southern part of Banten, where the main economy rely on agricultural sector. So that's the story of my research so far. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Yos. I think we have a question from the virtual attendee. I have Nika, yeah. Nika, time is starting. You can ask your question.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Perfectly,
So
Nika.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Bang Gde. I'm sorry I cannot open my camera right now because it's 6 a.m. in Leiden. So, but thank you so much, Yos, for your presentation. And because my research is also in the intellectual history of domestic life, and I think your research makes me think more about the political snowballing consequences of familial relations. So I have two clarifying questions. The first one is about within the dynastic politics that you see, do you find any differences between, for instance, relations between the so-called nuclear family, that is father, mother, and biological children or adopted children, with the extended family members like niece, nephews, or between uncles or aunts, and how that's the first question. And then the second one is the gender dynamics of it, whether, for instance, the budget, I don't know, this is my speculation, whether, for instance, the budget, just in planning budget distribution, if it's daughter, it has different numbers, or if it's son, it's bigger or something like that. So I'm just curious about that. And then the last part of my question is perhaps more of a not suggestion, but more perhaps this is to be explored further. Is because in my understanding, when we talk about family, it's always talk about family as institution, but rarely talk about the emotional attachment within the familial relations. And I believe I think in the political science and political theory right now too, there's some more discussion about emotions in politics, and I think our colleagues Uli and Sari also writing about emotive politics, and I'm just wondering whether dynastic politics also hinge on this kind of like emotional attachment between familial members, and perhaps will be the next project, or I don't know, to think about, to theorize about dynastic politics. Thank you, Yos.
Thank you, Nika, for your great question. So, to answer your first question, yes, there is a difference between father, mother, or biological, those who share biological ties compared to marriage or extended family members. So most of the dynasties are, first they will concentrate on their immediate family members, right? Like the core family members, wife or wives, son, daughters, and or parents. And then it expand if they don't, if they're exhausted of the options to nominate their family members, then they extend to nephew, cousins, and also in-laws. But the farther the connection, the weaker the influence of organizational support to the running family. So that's why, for example, in Banten, they focus on the first family first, the core member of the Ratu Atus family. Although then the children for Haji Kasan's second wife also occupy some important political positions. Actually, the support is half-hearted, I would say, and that's the difference, the main differences, Nika. And in terms of gender distribution, of course, mostly they nominate, if possible, they nominate sons. There's some gender bias there, but if they don't have, if the son, some families, the sons are too young to run for office, for example, then they will nominate wife first, and then move. As the son grow older, they will nurture the son and then promote the son to the next political position. But there's some very interesting gender aspect in dynasty formation, because first, there's always this debate and questions about if the successor is a woman, are they just being the puppet of the male relative or no? The problem is we can't say definitely about that, but based on some anecdotal evidence, yes, usually the one who who arrange everything on the background are the men, but this is very unfortunate, because some would argue dynastic politics is a way to increase women representation in politics, but substantially we have to highly question that assertion. So the third question is about emotional attachment. I'm glad you're asking that question, Nika, because yes, there is a emotional attachment to dynastic politics and dynasty making So emotion plays a very tricky role in dynasty building. Those who love their sons or daughters very much, but ignoring the capacities, the capabilities that the daughters or the son have, are usually the one who failed in dynasty building. Because I don't have I really like this quotes by, actually from, I took it from Game of Thrones. It's from Tywin Lannister. And it represents all the ideas about emotional attachment in dynasty building. The quotes as follow: "The house who puts family first will always defeat the house that puts the whims and the wishes of its sons and daughters first." So it really represents how institutions are built within political families, and how as a political organization, they have to still apply modern principle of organizing a political organization. Maybe that's my short answer, Nika. Thank you, Nika.
Thank you, Yos. We have a lineup of questions. Yeah, first from Dr. Fermante, and then Professor Winters, and then we have Pika and Ara virtually during the Zoom. Yeah.
Banyak.
Thank you. You got a lot of questions because this is a question of today. My question is, it's not really a question, probably comment. The case or the sites that you are mentioned, Banten, Medan, South Sulawesi, have long been dynastic, even before Indonesia probably became independent.
Yeah.
Max Havelaar,
yeah,
the novel that was published in 1859, told the story about dynastic politics in Lebak. And then also, I think then the question would be, is it familial politics, or is it familial democracy that you are aiming at? Because as you said, it can survive in democracy or in authoritarian regime. During Suharto, this dynastic politics aligned themselves probably with the military, with the New Order regime, and so on, and also in Banten. And the regime also co-opted them in order to survive as well. Yeah. Now in democracy, they just use the platform to secure and to operate as usual. So my question is, going back to your own question in your last statement, what would contribute to this dynastic politics to rise in certain condition?
Yeah. Thank you, Pa Philip, for the question. So when I choose my the case that I discuss in depth, I choose those who are most successful, of course, Banten, and those cases who show some degree of success but also failure that is represented in some cases in South Sulawesi and Southeast Sulawesi, and also the cases where it should be successful but eventually they fail to build political dynasties in Kepulauan Riau. So my point is, I want to show that building political dynasty is not an easy enterprise. Not all families who can build political dynasties. Only those who are really can build their organizational capabilities who can succeed in winning this political game. My concern with the terms of familial democracy is not necessarily about the family politics itself, because there are some in my dissertation I've discussed about the familial politics, which I understand the intrafamilial politics like sibling rivalries and stuff. But my concern is the growing numbers of dynastic politicians who join the elections, who monopolize the candidacy in many regions in Indonesia, and it keeps increasing from time to time. and I don't see any signs of slowing down. I'm afraid we're heading towards either Philippines or Thailand trajectory. It's too early to say, but there's no institutions that can stop them right now. We'll see how because in compared because as Michael Buehler argued, actually the nature of Indonesian political dynasties are ephemeral. It's temporary, but Bueller only see up until 2015, if I'm not mistaken. But if you stretch the timeline, I'm afraid we will see political dynasties who learn to build organizational capabilities and can dominate politics in the long run. And yeah, but thank you for the question, and I'll keep that in mind when I refining this concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Jos. My question is descriptive.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know maybe two things. One, if we think geographically about Indonesia, in your view, can these dynasties arise anywhere? That is, you see even distribution of them across Indonesia, or to put it differently, is there somewhere where you really don't see the phenomenon of dynasties arising?
Yeah.
And what might be the reasons for that?
Yeah.
And related to that is the question, do you see dynasties as frequently in major urban areas as they appear in smaller urban or non-urban areas? Again, what is the nature of the distribution?
Yeah.
And then so that's just a kind of geographic question. The second question is, if a dynasty becomes implanted in a particular area, does it ever compete with another dynasty in the same space, or does it crowd out dynasties for that space? And so it becomes the only dynastic player.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a great question. So if I see the distribution, so right now, maybe like I forget the exact number, but almost like 20% of all subnational units in Indonesia have political dynasties, right? So, but remember, we just entering this democracy in about 20, 25 years. So it's a long way to go. And I'm afraid the number can go up easily in the coming years. And as for areas that quite immune to political dynasties, so far is I was expecting Medan initially, but apparently it fell into another. But this is another story of another type of political dynasty, but only in Jakarta and Surabaya, who are quite immune to political dynasties. But I don't know if one day Gibran decided, okay, I'm running for Jakarta governor. Who knows? We will have another political dynasty in Jakarta. AHY failed back in 2017, but I believe other political dynasties will try to capture Jakarta. And right now, I really hope that Jakarta can defy my expectation. But looking at some names who are vying for Jakarta governorship, I'm quite shaky, looking at the potential of having Jakarta and Surabaya not infiltrated by political dynasty, but in other areas, if they don't have political dynasty, I would say they don't have political dynasty yet. Yeah, but maybe when the second terms are already running out, then if this insecure, powerful figures, maybe they will engage in dynastic politics in those areas. So in terms of city, urban, and no difference between the percentage of, because they can appear everywhere. Even in Makassar, they have political dynasties. The deputy mayor is part of political dynasty. In Manado, in big cities in Indonesia, in Banjarmasin, they all have political dynasties. So only two exceptional cases, Jakarta and Surabaya, but we'll see how it will go in the coming years. And your second question, sorry. Okay, so there are several models of that, Jeff. In some places, initially they will have like one dynasty compete with another dynasty, and they basically is a war between families. But in other places, they build coalitions, like in Pandeglang, if I'm not mistaken, Pandeglang, they used to compete between the I think it's Jayabaya family, or yeah, I think it's the Jayabaya family, or I forgot one of the dynasties in Pandeglang compete with the Ratu Atus family, but in the end they built coalition. The region, the Bupati is from family A, the second Bupati from family B. Same in, I think in Klaten also have that kind of model where they build coalitions of political dynasties. In that case, they only two families who dominate the politics for the last 20 years, and it's a musical chair for them. Just ganti-gantian aja, from husband to wife, and wife to another wife, and and so on and so forth. And they're not nominating the kids because the kids are still very young, but they're nurturing the kids by placing them in various strategic or civic organizations and build their reputation from below. So that's part of the organizational building that I mentioned. They built their reputation. So in the future, the game is no longer dropping them directly, like what happened with several other dynasties that we know so far. But in the future, I guess, I think the trend will be they will promote the kids from below. This is what happened in the Philippines, where they occupy barangay office first, and they build their political career up, so they have some not only experience but also some credentials or credibility to support their nomination. So that's my 2 cents. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Yas. I think we have 2 questions. Wow, we have, wow. Let me take all of them, yeah. But first, people in the virtual attendees, yeah. Let's give the question to Dika and Ara first, yeah. And then all the question. We're gonna take all the questions. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Dika
Thank
and
you.
Ara, would you be so kind asking your question quickly, and then we'll take the rest from the audience. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mashir, for sharing with us this fascinating research. You offered us a framework to consider a political phenomenon in democracy that we otherwise take for granted for a really long time, which highlights the perpetuations of perhaps a family-based office defense industry or political power expansions, industry centering on familial ties. I actually have 2 questions, but I will just go with my second one. How influential, Masias, the access thing, if any, in your observations? Have there been any meaningful counter movements from voters, society, or even rule of law that would likely dissuade candidates or politicians to tap into the political dynasty models? I think the simple questions is, what will negate political dynasty, if any? Thank you.
What will, sorry, Dika, can you repeat that?
What will negate, like what will dissuade dynasty politicians to tap into that resources of familial ties into competing into the political arena?
Thank you, Dika, for such a great question and very considerate, yeah, asking only one. Thank you. Ara,
Yeah, congratulations, Yos, on this. Really enjoyed your spatial analysis of the dynasties. I also have several questions, but I'll ask just one. And apologies if you've covered this already, but I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more on your category of rational and whether your category of rational correlates more towards the distribution of risks, potentials, or probably something other. So I was wondering if you could reflect more on what you call as rational. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ara, and good to see you. We have questions from the audience here. Oh, Mas Tesri, and then Mbak, and then Pak Ucup, ya.
Okay, thanks, Gde. Thank you for the presentation, Yus. Nice to see you again here. And it is very interesting topic, I think, and this is a long time research that you're doing, right? Since you start your program. After you did your research, this is my first question. What is the interesting part or the maybe surprising ones from the political dynasty in Indonesia that you can tell us? And the second one, you says about political dynasty in Thailand and the Philippines, and then my question, after you did the literature review about political dynasty in other countries in Southeast Asia, what are the similarities and differences that characterize political dynasty in Indonesia that you can compare to other countries in Southeast Asia? Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Luthfi Adam. I'm a PhD student. So thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to comment first. It is very interesting when you can find the gap. There is no debates on the familial democracy. So it is very interesting. My question is, I have two questions. So when you are talking about the what can you say, a justification or the reason about the familial or political dynasty, you find out the rational, we can say rational choice theory, right? When you are talking about the resilience and threat, what else beside the resilience and threat? That is the first question. And then number two, how do you see when SBY try to SBY and AHY, right? When AHY is already maintained his military career, so what is your opinion about that? And lastly, I hope it's not too long. Lastly, what do you think about the political dynasty when you see your family, your son is the best to fill that position? It is kind of there is no public education about who or who can be the rest. The rest can be also fill in that position. There is no political education here. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Can you repeat your first question again, Sylvia?
The first question, when you find rational as a justification, rational choice, right? Yeah. It is you mentioned about the resilience and threat. What else beside that? Thank you.
And I think for the last question from Sofyan.
Thanks. Congrats, yes. My name is Sofyan.
Hi, Sofyan. Good to know.
Yes, we've been talking about this for quite some times, but I think there's some merits if you can clarify what constitutes dynasty first. And then I think it's from what I heard from you, it's quite different from what the giants have been discussing dynasty, and then you were proposing your own terms of dynasty, right? I think this is also going to be reflected in your data set too, right? Thank you.
Okay, time is yours. Yes.
Wow. Thank you for your questions. So first, I think I will answer Mas Tesri's question first, yeah, before I go to others. So thank you for asking that question, Mas Esri. Actually, the most interesting part in studying political dynasty is the non-political cause of dynastic failure. You know, like or some elements of that actually is more sociological rather than political of dynasty making. First is like the issue of polygamy, for example. For some families, polygamy is like the dynasty breaker. Like some families fail to build their political dynasties because, for example, the uh, the son-in-law who become a bupati married a dandut singer, for example, and the support from the patriarch in the next election is actually gone, and that's the end of that dynasty. That's very interesting one. The other thing is other families can use polygamy as a tool to like build army. Like in Kediri is the most famous one. In one elections, the bupati nominate the first and second wife, and in the subsequent elections, the bupati nominate the first and the third wife. So whoever won the election, the bupati wins, right? And in other parts of Indonesia, like for example in Banten, they have huge or like reserve who can be promoted for the next succession of political dynasty, not only from the first family or the family from the first wife, but also from the second wife, third wife, fourth wife, and so on and so forth. So so this is very interesting part that I found during my research. Actually, the non-political one, not the more sociological aspect of dynasty making. And regarding the similarities and differences, the similarities, maybe I will highlight the differences because, for example, in the Philippines, the base is they started from landed oligarchs, like from the owners of haciendas, so they have a very strong capital, and then over time they modernize their business and exist for decades, if not century now. But Indonesia, we just started the political this phenomenon, and as mentioned by Bueller, it's still ephemeral. Like they're still struggling to maintain their domination because, for example, the central state can easily uh, uh, implicate them in corruption cases, and that's the end of the dynasty. So maybe the power base, the material base of their power is the most significant differences between Indonesia and the Philippines. As in Thailand, the most interesting part is some of the dynasties are actually backed by the king, by the monarch, and we don't have that kind of system in Indonesia. So that's some of the differences. Move to Ara and Dika, how influential, what was Dika's first question again? How influential, can you repeat your question, Dika?
Yeah, about the counter movements against dynasty.
The counter movements against dynasty. Okay, I think we can answer Dika's question and Sylvia's third question. The problem is the society is quite permissive towards political dynasty. So in other part of my research, I also do some surveys on public opinion survey on dynastic politics. They don't basically Indonesian public, they don't outrightly reject political dynasties. Some of them, so it's in the middle. They when we ask why would you support political dynasty, they said I prefer to wait and see and give the benefit of the doubt to the dynastic politician, because apa ya, the lesser evil kind of situation. So that's why it's if you look from the voter side, it's quite difficult to totally ban political dynasties, because or totally fight political dynasties, because they're quite permissive towards the presence of dynastic politics in Indonesia. And the other thing is the other counter movement, maybe if the media can play a very significant role, or the civil society can play a significant role in naming and shaming. It's part of the one of the strategies that were successful in one of the areas in Indonesia where dynastic politicians actually failed even when they compete against Kota Kosong. But now with the ITE law, with with all the draconian laws, it's kind of difficult to do that, because the perceived threats to do the naming and shaming can have a high cost for those who launch that campaign. And I think it's also related to Ara's question. And rational, Ara, for in my perspective, is a simple cost-benefit analysis of dynastic politicians when they see dominating their political families will bring greater benefit compared to the cost from of course from their perspective. What else? So many maybe it's regarding SBY. I think it's a premature move from SBY by asking AHY to resign early. I think when AHY was still a major, so he should have wait for a couple more years, maybe colonels or generals, and build finish his military career, and then go to politics like any other political elites that before him. Maybe that's some of my quick answer. And what constitute political dynasties from Sofyan? I see it as first, instead of defining political dynasty first, which is the noun, I define what is dynastic politics first. Dynastic politics first as the verb. Dynastic politics is basically a mode of organizing power, and which involves at least two members of the same family. And for me, it's enough, because what I emphasize is the mode of organizing the power, not the length or how big the size of the dynasty. Because what's important is how they organize their power, not necessarily the size of the dynasty. So, but then we build the variations. There are some dynasty who can only win in one region, but in others, there's some dynasty who can totally dominate the political landscape in not only one or two districts, but the whole province, for example. So, and to achieve that status, it requires a lot of work. It requires, and not all families can do that. And I would argue that maybe only two families who can do that so far in Indonesia, but we'll see. Hopefully they learn from my theory, they build their organization. I don't know, just kidding. Nanti dituduh pro dinasti lagi, mati kita. Okay, that's my short answer.
Apparently, we still have 15 minutes, yes?
Oh, okay.
I'd like to have a question myself. Yeah, I'd be selfish, and then Pak Irfan, and then Luthfi. Yeah.
Maybe we can sit by it.
Yeah, you definitely can sit. I'm really sorry about that. Yeah. And you can use this one actually.
Pegal juga.
Okay, I'll sit here with you. Yeah. Why not? Sure. This is a great dissertation that a lot of Indonesian political scientists is waiting for, yeah, especially the data set. Obviously, the variation in your research is whether a political dynasty can maintain itself or whether they fail. Has the potential but fail.
Check, yeah, maintain, failed, and then those who can maintain and dominate. And so dominate. There's layers of
right. And if I'm not mistaken, if memory serves me, your argument is organizational.
Yeah.
Those political dynasty that can build a strong and robust organization will prevail.
Yeah.
My question is simple. How do we know a strong and robust political or family organization when we see it?
Yeah.
Instead of engaging in ex post facto rationalization.
Yeah. So theoretically we can make quantification of the strength of their organization, right? But right now, unfortunately, my research can only deep dive into some examples, some qualitative examples, and I compare those qualitative examples and see which family did certain things in the institutional building, for example. So, for example, whether or not they have if you learn from the mafia family, whether or not they have this consigliere, for example, whether or not they have a number of functions that they can delegate to people outside the family, whether or not all family members know who is the final arbitrators if they encounter conflict within the family. So by analyzing those qualitative stuff and compare from one family to another, we can actually get some snippets of this organizational building. Theoretically, we can quantify that, but unfortunately, right now, maybe I will develop that later in my next projects. But right now it's too ambitious for a dissertation to develop that.
So which families has consigliere and Nofredos? Yeah.
Thank you, Mas Yos. I'm curious whether there is a correlation between the flourish of dynastic politics with the corruptions, meaning that when the more corrupt the political system is, the more flourish the political dynasties. Is there any correlation between that? Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Irfan. Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, as I mentioned earlier, then dynastic politicians are the most insecure, powerful individuals out there because they're afraid that after they step down from their power, what legal consequences that will await them in the future, and how they can maintain the family income and stuff. So initially I have, I think 4 years ago, when someone asked me the same question, I would argue there's no correlation between corruption and political dynasties. But now, as I see more evidence of dynastic politicians are implicated in corruption cases, I become quite confident that there's strong correlation like between dynastic politics and corruption. The problem is with corruption is we can only know that they're corrupt when there's a legal case against them, right? So we know it's like we know that these individuals are corrupt, but as long as there are no legal actions towards them, against them, then it's quite difficult to build like a very conclusive statement that yes, dynasty equals corruption. But based on anecdotal cases and based on recent developments in Kutai Timur, for example, in Bangkalan, in Southeast Sulawesi, and even in Banten, yes, they're showing more and more tendency that dynastic politics correlates with corruption. Again, it's because unlike in the Philippines, I think Buhler said this in his paper, unlike in the Philippines where they built their material power from haciendas and from capitalist businesses, in Indonesia they're more likely start from siphoning the state budget and then but even in the Philippines, I think I highly doubt that because probably they influence the justice system in the Philippines, so no corruption. But back to Indonesia's case, it's I think it's highly correlated with corruption. The successful dynasties are actually the one who can maybe siphon the state budget and then they build businesses and other source of material endowments to support their political endeavor. So there's a modernization of, I hate to say that term, the modernization of business organization also in the family, like what happened in some areas in Indonesia. They grab all the Ferraris, the Lamborghinis, the KPK confiscated the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis, but they still have private entities who are still can support the family enterprise, the family's political enterprise in subsequent elections. So those who can modernize their business model are likely to survive and maintain their dynastic domination in the future. Yeah.
My question is closely related with Otto's question, so I will let Otto to ask.
Yeah. So thanks for the presentation, Masios. I guess my question is related to whether or not there is a significant cultural element in dynastic politics. And why I ask that question is because if we were to use, for example, Java as an example, there is a significant cultural element in terms of people looking for Ratu Adil.
Yeah.
So there is this a certain connection between ngeliat, for example, looking for the connection of dynasties, right? If there's a council member or something that does a good job, there's a tendency to believe that their son would also do a good job, right? So yeah, the question really comes down to, and that really is different if you were to compare it to, for example, if dynastic politics succeeds because of a practical reason, right? Because a council member has the facilities to ensure that their son also wins elections, right? So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Otto, for the question. So I think in some parts of Indonesia, so it is not like the argument of, oh, it's their political culture, that's why they're permissive to political dynasty. It's not like that. I think in some part of Indonesia they use cultural symbol to build their legitimacy, to support their candidacy, to support their narratives in the campaign. But I don't think people vote for those dynastic politicians because of it's their political culture. I think they bought the narrative, or maybe they receive the money from the politicians. But to argue that it is their political culture that accept that permissive to political dynasties. I don't believe that at all, because otherwise we would see in many areas that have, for example, that have sultanates or kingdoms in the past, or part of the old monarchs in pre-colonial times. We would see dynastic politicians survive or emerge from that class of ruling elite. But so far, only in some places, like in Bone and in Toli-Toli. And I don't believe it's because it's because of their culture, but it's because the members of this family serve their constituent rightly in those areas. I mean, this is quite problematic because in Indonesia you only need like 30%. If there's more than 2 candidates, you only need 30% to win elections, right? So it means like getting votes from 30% and ignoring the 70% in elections where there are more than 2 candidates is enough in Indonesia. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. So, but I really don't believe in the argument of political culture. That's why I reject Nishizaki's conclusion that dynastic democracy is caused by Thai political culture or patrimonialism that is embedded in the Thai society. I think it's more about how they organize their power in the provinces and how they connect with the national politics in Thailand. When the regime change, how they adjust their affiliation to the ruling regime at the national level. So it takes a lot of organization, not only vertical to top-down vertical, but also bottom-up organization, and also vertical. So it's a multidimensional of organizing capacity.
All right. Thank you, Yos. Now we have to have a break for 1 hour. Everybody is invited to have lunch upstairs. So you just go straight and then take the stairs. So lunch is served next room upstairs. And we had a three great presentation already in the first session. And after lunch, we will come back here. There will be 3 more that I believe will be as great as the 3 presentations that we had. Thank you, Gde, for effective chairing. And thank you all for attending this first session. See you at 1 p.m.